Close your eyes for a moment. Or imagine a river, not the Nile, with its ancient floods, not the Euphrates, carrying the first whispers of cities, but the Tiber, quieter, narrower, humbler, moving gently through the low hills of central Italy, long before marble temples, triumphal arches, and imperial palaces rose above its banks. Imagine a small cluster of huts beneath a darkening sky, smoke lifting from simple hearths, cattle moving through the reeds, the soft sound of water against mud and stone. No Colosseum yet, no legions marching across continents, no emperors, no senators in white togas, no roads stretching toward Britain, Egypt, Syria, and Africa. Only a river, a few hills, a fragile settlement, and somewhere inside that quiet beginning, the future of the ancient world waiting to awaken. That is Rome. And tonight, we are going there together. Welcome back to Ashes of Civilizations. I'm glad you're here. Whether you are lying beneath a heavy blanket, resting in a dark room, listening with tired eyes, or simply letting the day loosen its grip, this is the right place for you to be. Tonight's journey is a long one, and it should be. Because Rome is not a story that can be rushed. It is not only the story of emperors, armies, and conquest. It is the story of a village that became a republic that became an empire, and an empire that left echoes so deep that even now, when we speak of law, citizenship, senates, roads, power, collapse, and civilization, we are still speaking, in some quiet way, with Rome. Before we begin, if you enjoy these long, slow journeys into the ancient world, consider subscribing and leaving a like. It truly helps this channel reach more tired minds who may need a calm story before sleep. And if you feel like it, write your city and the hour on your clock in the comments. Perhaps it is midnight in Istanbul, early evening in New York, a cold morning in London, or a silent night somewhere far from the Mediterranean. There is something deeply comforting in knowing that people scattered across the world may all be drifting toward the same ancient river tonight. For the next few hours, wherever we are, we will stand together on the banks of the Tiber. We will watch huts become temples, villages become roads, roads become provinces, and a city of mud, timber, ambition, and memory become the center of an empire. So now, let everything grow quieter. Settle in. Let your shoulders loosen. Let your breathing slow. And imagine, far away, in the dark blue hour before dawn, the Tiber River moving softly through the hills of Latium. Rome has not yet risen, but it is beginning, quietly, almost invisibly, like a seed beneath the soil. To understand Rome, we must first forget Rome as it appears in memory. We must forget, for a moment, the image of white marble shining under the Italian sun, the imperial eagles, the red cloaks of generals, the immense stone amphitheaters, and the names of men who would later reshape the world. Before all of that, there was geography. There was the Tiber River. There were the low hills. There was the central Italian landscape, neither too far from the sea nor too exposed to it, close enough to trade, but inland enough to be defensible. Rome grew in Latium, a region inhabited by Latin-speaking peoples, surrounded by other communities whose languages, customs, and political traditions shaped early Roman life. To the north were the powerful Etruscans, with their wealthy cities, skilled metalwork, religious rituals, and urban sophistication. To the south and east were other Italic peoples, Sabines, Samnites, Volsci, Aequi, and many more. Farther south, Greek colonies dotted the coasts of southern Italy and Sicily, bringing temples, alphabets, art, philosophy, and commerce. Rome was not born in isolation. It was born at a crossroads. The hills beside the Tiber offered protection from floods and enemies. The river offered movement. Nearby salt routes connected inland communities to the coast. The landscape encouraged exchange, rivalry, and cooperation. Small settlements on the Palatine, Capitoline, Aventine, Quirinal, Viminal, Esquiline, and Caelian hills gradually formed a shared community. Later Romans told the story differently. They spoke of gods, omens, wolves, twins, and destiny. They said that Rome began with Romulus and Remus, twin brothers descended from the Trojan hero Aeneas, abandoned as infants, saved by a she-wolf, and raised among the wild places near the river. They said that Romulus founded the city in 753 BC, after a quarrel that ended with Remus dead, and Romulus standing as the first king of Rome. This story was not history in the modern sense, it was memory shaped into myth. But myths tell us something too. They tell us how a people wanted to understand themselves. The Romans imagined their city as both sacred and violent from the beginning, protected by the gods, nourished by hardship, and marked by conflict. The death of Remus at the very edge of the new city suggested that Rome's walls, laws, and authority were serious things. To cross them improperly was dangerous. To challenge the order of Rome was to invite consequence. And yet, Rome was also imagined as a place open to outsiders. Romulus, in later tradition, gathered fugitives, exiles, refugees, and wanderers. Rome became a refuge for those without a home. This theme would echo through Roman history. Rome expanded not only by destroying enemies, but by absorbing them, making allies into citizens, turning conquered peoples into soldiers, administrators, taxpayers, and eventually Romans. The earliest Rome was humble. Archaeology suggests huts on the Palatine Hill, wooden structures, earthen floors, simple burials, small communities slowly joining into a more organized settlement. The Forum, later the political and ceremonial heart of the Roman world, was once a marshy lowland between hills. It had to be drained before it could become a public center. Imagine that landscape now. The future Forum is not yet lined with temples and basilicas. It is wet ground and mist. Cattle move slowly through reeds. Smoke rises from small huts. The sound of footsteps in mud replaces the later roar of crowds. And yet, beneath that quiet ground, the future is waiting. Rome's first age, the regal period, was remembered as the Age of Kings. Tradition listed 7 kings: Romulus, Numa Pompilius, Tullus Hostilius, Ancus Marcius, Tarquinius Priscus, Servius Tullius, and Tarquinius Superbus. Modern historians approach these names carefully. Some may preserve memories of real leaders, others may be shaped by legend, but the stories attached to them reveal how Romans explained the origins of their institutions. Romulus gave Rome its first military and political order. Numa Pompilius, the peaceful and religious king, gave Rome priesthoods, calendars, and sacred customs. Tullus Hostilius represented warlike expansion. Ancus Marcius joined war and religion, and was associated with the first bridge over the Tiber and the port of Ostia. The later kings, especially those connected with Etruscan influence, represented urban development, drainage works, temples, walls, and royal power. Whether each detail is exact matters less, in this sleepy journey, than the larger truth. Early Rome was shaped by war, religion, engineering, and adaptation. It learnt from neighbors, it borrowed, it absorbed. It changed. From the Etruscans, Rome likely received important religious practices, symbols of authority, urban techniques, and perhaps forms of ceremonial display. The purple-bordered toga, the curial chair, the fasces carried by attendants, the triumphal procession, and aspects of divination all reflect a world in which Rome was deeply connected to Etruscan culture. Rome did not emerge fully formed. It became Rome by taking in the world around it. And slowly, as the settlement grew, one thing became clear. Rome was not content to remain a village. Its hills gathered people, its river carried goods, its leaders organized labor, rituals, soldiers, and alliances. The marsh was drained. The Forum began to form. The Capitoline became sacred. The city's boundaries, both physical and spiritual, became more defined. But the Age of Kings would not last forever. The Romans would later remember the last king, Tarquinius Superbus, as proud, violent, and tyrannical. His rule became the dark example against which Roman liberty defined itself. The monarchy fell, according to tradition, after a crisis involving royal abuse, aristocratic outrage, and a revolt led by men who vowed that Rome would never again be ruled by a king. The exact details of that revolution are wrapped in legend, but around the end of the 6th century BC, Rome did move away from monarchy and into a new political form. A republic, a res publica, a public thing, a commonwealth, a state that claimed it belonged not to one king, but to its citizens, its magistrates, its senate, its assemblies, and its laws. The word king, rex, would remain poisonous in Roman political culture for centuries. Even when Rome later came to be ruled by emperors more powerful than any king, those emperors would be careful, especially at first, not to call themselves kings. The memory of the monarchy stayed like a shadow. Rome had learnt to fear one-man rule, and yet the desire for order, glory, and command never disappeared. That tension between liberty and authority, citizenship and conquest, law and ambition, would shape the entire Roman story. The Roman Republic did not begin as a perfect democracy. It was not a modern state. It was not equal in the way we might imagine equality today. It was a complex, evolving system dominated at first by aristocratic families, structured through magistracies, religious offices, assemblies, military obligations, and social rank. But it created something powerful, a political culture in which public office, law, reputation, ancestry, military service, and civic duty became deeply intertwined. The early republic was led by annually elected magistrates, especially two consuls, who replaced the king's military and executive authority. By having two consuls at once and limiting their term to 1 year, Rome tried to prevent any single man from holding royal power permanently. The Senate, originally an advisory council of leading men, became the center of aristocratic influence. It did not pass laws in the same way a modern parliament might, but its prestige, continuity, and control over finance, foreign policy, and tradition made it enormously powerful. Popular assemblies elected magistrates, passed laws, and decided certain matters of war, peace, and justice. But voting structures often favored wealthier citizens, and the early republic was dominated by patricians, the old aristocratic families who claimed special status. Yet Rome was never politically still. One of the great internal dramas of early Roman history was the conflict of the orders, the long struggle between patricians and plebeians. Plebeians were the broader body of Roman citizens outside the patrician elite. Many were farmers, artisans, soldiers, and small landholders. They served in Rome's armies, paid debts, worked the land, and suffered during wars. Over time, plebeians demanded protection from aristocratic abuse and access to political power. Their most famous weapon was withdrawal, the cessatio plebis. The plebeians could simply leave the city or refuse military service, forcing the elite to negotiate. Through these struggles, they gained their own officials, the tribunes of the plebs, who had the sacred authority to protect plebeians and veto certain actions. They gained written laws in the 12 Tables, traditionally dated to the mid-5th century BC. They gained access, gradually, to magistracies, priesthoods, and political influence. The 12 Tables were important, not because they created equality, but because they represented a move toward public, known law. In a world where unwritten custom could be controlled by aristocrats, writing the law was a profound act. Imagine the bronze tablets displayed in the Forum, citizens gathering to see rules made visible. Debt, family authority, property, injury, procedure, inheritance. Ordinary matters of life placed into public form. Rome's law would change enormously over the centuries, but this early impulse toward legal structure became one of Rome's greatest legacies. The Republic also formed a harsh and disciplined civic ideal. Romans admired gravitas, seriousness, dignity, weight. They admired virtus, courage, excellence, manly valor in the language of the time. They admired pietas, duty toward gods, family, and state. They admired disciplina, training, self-control, order. They admired mos maiorum, the custom of the ancestors. These ideals were never perfectly lived. Romans could be greedy, cruel, ambitious, divided, and corrupt. But the ideals mattered because Romans used them to judge themselves and others. A Roman aristocrat wanted glory, but glory was supposed to be won through service to the state. A family wanted honor, but honor was tied to public memory, funeral masks, ancestral achievements, and the expectation that descendants should live up to the dead. The early republic was also a military society. Citizens were soldiers. Farmers could be called to war, fight in seasonal campaigns, then return to their fields. Rome's early wars were not yet the world-spanning campaigns of later centuries. They were local and regional struggles against neighboring peoples, Latins, Sabines, Equi, Volsci, Etruscan cities, and eventually the formidable Samnites in the mountains of central and southern Italy. These wars were brutal, repetitive, and formative. Rome lost battles. Rome suffered humiliation. Rome adapted. That may be one of the deepest Roman patterns. Defeat rarely ended Rome. Defeat taught Rome. When the Romans faced the Samnites, a tough mountain people with flexible tactics suited to rugged terrain, they encountered a kind of warfare that challenged their methods. The Samnite Wars stretched across decades in the 4th and early 3rd centuries BC. Rome learned, adjusted its military organization, expanded its alliances, and pushed deeper into Italy. Rome's conquest of Italy was not simply a matter of armies marching outward and crushing everyone. It was also a matter of treaties. alliances, colonies, roads, citizenship rights in varying degrees. Some communities received full Roman citizenship, others received Latin rights, others remained allies obligated to provide troops. Rome created a web of obligations that bound Italy to Roman power, while allowing local communities to retain aspects of their identity. This system was hard, unequal, and often coercive, but it was also flexible. Rome did not always annihilate defeated enemies. Often it incorporated them. It took their soldiers into its war machine. It tied their elites to Roman interests. It planted colonies in strategic places. It built roads that served armies first, but trade and communication afterward. One of the earliest great roads, the Via Appia, begun in 300 BC under Appius Claudius Caecus, connected Rome southward toward Capua and later Brundisium. Roads like this were not merely engineering works, they were lines of control, memory, and movement. Along them marched legions, merchants, officials, messages, and stories. By the early 3rd century BC, Rome had become the dominant power in Italy. But beyond Italy lay the wider Mediterranean, and across the sea, another power watched, traded, built ships, counted silver, and guarded its own empire, Carthage. The meeting of Rome and Carthage would change everything. Before Rome became mistress of the Mediterranean, it was primarily a land power. Its strength came from citizens, allies, roads, fields, discipline, and armies marching across Italian soil. Carthage was different. Founded by Phoenician settlers from the city of Tyre, Carthage stood on the coast of North Africa, in what is now Tunisia. It was wealthy, maritime, commercial, and deeply connected to Western Mediterranean trade. Its ships moved between Africa, Sicily, Sardinia, Spain, and beyond. Its power rested on naval strength, commerce, tribute, strategic colonies, and the ability to hire and command diverse forces. For a time, Rome and Carthage were not natural enemies. They had treaties. They occupied different spheres. But Sicily lay between them, and Sicily was too important to remain untouched. The First Punic War began in 2064 BC and lasted more than 20 years. It was Rome's first great overseas war. At the start, Rome did not have the naval tradition of Carthage. But Rome did what Rome often did. It learnt. According to tradition, the Romans studied captured ships and built fleets of their own. They developed boarding devices, such as the corvus, to turn sea battles into something more like land battles, where Roman soldiers could fight hand-to-hand. The war was long and exhausting. Fleets were destroyed by storms. Battles were won and lost. Sicily was contested field by field, harbour by harbour. In the end, Rome won. Carthage gave up Sicily, which became Rome's first province. Soon after, Rome also took Sardinia and Corsica in circumstances that deepened Carthaginian resentment. Rome had stepped beyond Italy. It had learnt to rule overseas. It had tasted provincial power. But the greater storm had not yet come. The Second Punic War, beginning in 218 BC, brought one of the most dramatic figures in ancient history onto the Roman stage, Hannibal Barca. Hannibal, son of Hamilcar Barca, inherited not only military genius, but a family hatred of Rome. From Carthaginian Spain, he built an army, crossed the Ebro, moved through southern Gaul, and undertook the legendary passage across the Alps into Italy. Imagine it slowly. Snow and rock, narrow paths above deadly drops, men from many lands struggling through cold and hunger, horses slipping, pack animals dying, war elephants moving like shadows through mountain mist, and beyond the mountains, Italy, Rome's own homeland. Hannibal entered Italy not as a raider, but as a strategist seeking to break Rome's alliance system. He knew that Rome's strength lay not only in the city, but in the network of Italian allies that supplied soldiers. If those allies could be persuaded or forced to defect, Rome might collapse. At first, Hannibal seemed unstoppable. At the Trebia, he defeated Roman forces. At Lake Trasimene in 217 BC, he ambushed and destroyed a Roman army beside the water, in one of the great ambushes of military history. Then, in 216 BC, came Cannae. Cannae was catastrophe. A massive Roman army confronted Hannibal in southern Italy. The Romans expected their weight, numbers, and infantry force to crush him. Hannibal arranged his troops with extraordinary tactical intelligence, allowing the Roman centre to press forward while his stronger flanks and cavalry enveloped them. The result was a double envelopment, a near-total destruction of the Roman force. Tens of thousands died. The Roman aristocracy was devastated. Families mourned across the city. For many states, such a defeat would have ended the war. But Rome did not surrender. This is where the Roman character, idealized and harsh, becomes visible. Rome absorbed disaster. Rome raised more armies. Rome punished disloyalty. Rome avoided open battle when necessary. The strategy associated with Fabius Maximus, delay, harassment, patience, became a way to survive Hannibal without offering him another Cannae. Hannibal remained in Italy for years, but he never captured Rome itself. Some Italian communities defected, but not enough. Rome's alliance system bent, cracked in places, but did not break. Meanwhile, Roman commanders fought in Spain, cutting into Carthaginian resources. A young commander, Publius Cornelius Scipio, emerged as one of Rome's great military minds. He carried the war into Africa, threatening Carthage directly. Hannibal was recalled. In 202 BC, at Zama, Scipio defeated Hannibal. Carthage was spared, but reduced. It lost its overseas territories, its fleet, and its freedom to wage war without Roman permission. Rome had survived its greatest nightmare, and survival had changed it. After the Second Punic War, Rome was no longer just an Italian power with overseas possessions. It was a Mediterranean power. Its armies had operated in Spain, Africa, Sicily, and Greece. Its commanders had gained prestige beyond anything earlier generations could have imagined. Its people had endured trauma and emerged with a stronger sense of destiny. But victory brought new dangers. Wealth flowed into Rome. Slaves were brought in large numbers. Provinces offered opportunities for exploitation. Commanders became famous and powerful. Small farmers, long the backbone of the citizen army, struggled under the pressures of war, debt, and competition with large estates. Rome had defeated Carthage, but in doing so, it had opened the door to an empire that would strain the Republic from within. The Third Punic War, from 49 to 146 BC, was shorter and more final. Rome, suspicious and aggressive, demanded impossible concessions. Carthage resisted. After a long siege, Roman forces under Scipio Aemilianus captured and destroyed the city in 146 BC. Carthage burned. Its surviving people were enslaved. Its territory became the Roman province of Africa. In the same year, 146 BC, Rome also destroyed Corinth in Greece. Two ancient cities, one in the western Mediterranean and one in the Greek East, fell to Roman power. The symbolism was immense. Rome now stood at the center of a widening world, but the Republic's victories abroad were beginning to create crises at home. Empire did not arrive in Rome as a single decision. No one woke one morning and declared that Rome would rule the Mediterranean world from Spain to Syria, from Gaul to Africa, from Greece to Egypt. Empire accumulated. One war led to another. One alliance became a protectorate. One protectorate became a province. One commander's victory created another commander's ambition. One crisis abroad justified a new military command, and gradually, Rome found itself ruling peoples, languages, cities, kingdoms, coastlines, mines, fields, and trade routes far beyond the old boundaries of Latium. The Eastern Mediterranean drew Rome deeply into Greek affairs. After the Punic Wars, Rome fought Macedon, intervened in Greek leagues, negotiated with Hellenistic monarchs, and eventually made itself the decisive power in the old world of Alexander's successors. Greece, with all its cultural prestige, came under Roman domination. Asia Minor, Syria, and Egypt would later enter Rome's orbit in different ways. This contact changed Rome. Greek art filled Roman homes. Greek tutors educated Roman elites. Greek philosophy entered Roman conversation. Roman aristocrats admired Greece even as Roman armies subdued Greek cities. The famous phrase that conquered Greece conquered its fierce conqueror captures a real cultural truth. Rome dominated Greece politically, but Greek culture shaped Rome profoundly. Yet the empire's wealth was unevenly distributed. Aristocrats enriched themselves through provincial commands, tax contracts, war booty, and slave labor. Large estates, latifundia, expanded in parts of Italy, worked by enslaved people captured in wars. Small citizen farmers, who had once left their fields for campaigns and returned after a season, now faced longer wars, economic pressures, and displacement. The Roman army depended on citizens meeting property qualifications. But what happened when the citizens who had land lost it? What happened when soldiers returned from war to find debts, ruined farms, or estates they could no longer maintain. The Republic's old social balance began to weaken. The Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, tried to address some of these problems in the late 2nd century BC. Tiberius Gracchus, as tribune in 1303 BC, pushed for land reform, seeking to redistribute public land occupied by the wealthy to poorer citizens. His methods alarmed the Senate. His opponents saw him as a dangerous demagogue threatening property and tradition. The conflict escalated, and Tiberius was killed in political violence. A line had been crossed. Roman politics had always been fierce, but now blood had been spilled in the heart of public life. Gaius Gracchus, a decade later, pursued a broader program. Land, grain, colonies, judicial reforms, and efforts to expand citizenship rights to Italian allies. He too faced bitter opposition. He too died violently. The deaths of the Gracchi did not solve the Republic's problems. They revealed them. After them, Roman politics became more open to violence, street pressure, emergency measures, and personal followings. The Italian allies, who had fought for Rome for generations without full citizenship, grew increasingly resentful. Their soldiers bled in Roman wars, but their rights remained limited. This tension exploded in the Social War from 91 to 88 BC, when many Italian allies rebelled. Rome eventually extended citizenship widely across Italy, transforming the Roman citizen body. It was a crucial change. Rome was no longer only a city ruling Italy, legally and politically. Italy itself became Roman in a deeper sense. But even as citizenship expanded, military and political structures were changing dangerously. Gaius Marius, a brilliant commander, reformed army recruitment in ways that allowed poorer citizens to serve more fully. The details and long-term interpretation of these reforms are debated, but the broader pattern is clear. Armies became more closely tied to generals who could promise pay, land, and rewards. When soldiers looked to their commander for their future, rather than to the state alone, the Republic became vulnerable. Then came Sulla. Lucius Cornelius Sulla, an aristocratic commander, marched his army on Rome in 88 BC after a political struggle over command against Mithridates of Pontus. This was shocking. A Roman army had turned against Rome itself. Sulla left to fight in the east, returned, fought civil war, seized power, and became dictator. He carried out proscriptions, lists of enemies who could be killed and whose property could be confiscated. He tried to strengthen the Senate and weaken tribunes, reshaping the constitution in a conservative direction. But his example was more important than his reforms. He had shown that a general with loyal troops could take Rome. The Republic survived Sulla, but it was never the same. Ambitious men learnt the lesson. Military glory, wealth, popular support, and armed force could overpower tradition. The old Republic still had elections, magistrates, laws, and Senate debates, but beneath the surface, power was shifting. And three men would soon dominate the Roman world: Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar. The late Republic was a world of dazzling brilliance and deep instability. Rome's territories stretched widely. Its aristocrats competed for offices, triumphs, provinces, and glory. Its courts echoed with speeches, its streets filled with clients, gangs, voters, debtors, veterans, freedmen, traders, and foreign envoys. Temples rose, markets bustled, public games became more extravagant. And everywhere, ambition pressed against the old limits of the constitution. Pompey the Great was one of the age's most celebrated generals. As a young man, he supported Sulla and earned extraordinary commands. He fought in Sicily and Africa, campaigned in Spain against the Marian rebel Sertorius, helped finish the slave uprising associated with Spartacus, cleared pirates from the Mediterranean with remarkable speed, and reorganized the eastern provinces after defeating Mithridates. He was powerful, famous, and immensely successful. Marcus Licinius Crassus was known for wealth. He had profited during Sulla's proscriptions and became one of the richest men in Rome. He too had military prestige, especially from suppressing the revolt of Spartacus, though Pompey managed to share in the credit. Julius Caesar came from an ancient patrician family, but one that had lost much of its political dominance. He was ambitious, charismatic, bold, deeply indebted, and gifted with extraordinary political instinct. He cultivated popular support, aligned with influential figures, and understood the power of spectacle, mercy, risk, and language. In 60 BC, Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus formed an informal alliance, often called the First Triumvirate. It was not a legal office, It was a private arrangement among powerful men who could help one another overcome senatorial resistance. Caesar gained the consulship in 59 BC, then secured a command in Gaul. Gaul changed everything. From 58 to 50 BC, Caesar waged a series of campaigns across Gaul, crossing rivers, defeating tribes, intervening in local conflicts, invading Britain twice, and even bridging the Rhine to demonstrate Roman reach. His commentaries presented the campaigns in clear, controlled prose, shaping his image for readers in Rome. The conquest of Gaul brought enormous wealth, military loyalty, and glory. It also brought immense suffering to the peoples of Gaul. Roman expansion was not gentle. Cities were besieged, populations were enslaved, resistance was crushed. The great Gallic leader Vercingetorix united opposition and made his stand at Alesia in 52 BC. Caesar's forces built lines of fortification around the city, while also defending against relief forces outside. The siege ended in Roman victory. Vercingetorix surrendered and was later displayed in Caesar's triumph before being executed. By the end of the Gallic Wars, Caesar commanded battle-hardened legions personally loyal to him. Meanwhile, the political balance in Rome collapsed. Crassus died in 53 BC after his disastrous campaign against Parthia at Carrhae, where Roman forces suffered a devastating defeat. Pompey moved closer to the senatorial establishment. Caesar's enemies sought to force him to lay down his command and return to Rome as a private citizen, vulnerable to prosecution. Caesar refused. In 49 BC, he crossed the Rubicon River with his army. The phrase became immortal because it symbolized a point of no return. A Roman general had brought his troops into Italy against the state. Civil war began. Pompey and many senators fled east. Caesar moved quickly, securing Italy, Spain, and then pursuing Pompey. In 48 BC, at Pharsalus in Greece, Caesar defeated Pompey. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was murdered before Caesar arrived. In Egypt, Caesar became involved in the dynastic struggle between Cleopatra VII and her brother Ptolemy XIII. Cleopatra, intelligent, politically skilled, and determined to preserve her kingdom, allied with Caesar. Their relationship became one of the most famous in ancient history. Though beneath the romance later writers emphasized, there was hard politics. Egypt's wealth, grain, and strategic position mattered deeply to Rome. Caesar continued fighting across the Roman world, in Africa, Spain, and the East. He returned to Rome as dictator, gathering unprecedented authority. He reformed the calendar, settled veterans, planned colonies, expanded the Senate, and pursued measures that suggested both practical reform and personal domination. To some, Caesar was a necessary stabilizer after years of chaos. To others, he was a tyrant in all but name. The Roman hatred of kings returned like an old ghost. On the Ides of March 15, 44 BC, a group of senators assassinated Caesar in the theatre of Pompey. Among them were Brutus and Cassius, men who claimed they were restoring liberty, but Caesar's death did not restore the Republic. It shattered what remained of it. The assassins had removed the man. They had not solved the crisis. Rome plunged again into civil war. Caesar's adopted heir, Octavian, still very young, entered the political world with astonishing determination. Mark Antony, Caesar's lieutenant, sought to control Caesar's legacy. Lepidus, another powerful figure, joined them. Together they formed the Second Triumvirate, this time a legal three-man dictatorship. They pursued Caesar's assassins. They issued prescriptions. Cicero, the great orator and defender of the Republic's ideals, was killed. At Philippi in 42 BC, Brutus and Cassius were defeated. The Roman world was divided among the victors, but peace between ambitious rulers could not last. Mark Antony moved east and formed a political and personal alliance with Cleopatra. Octavian controlled the west and gradually shaped Roman opinion against Antony, presenting him as a man corrupted by Eastern luxury and foreign queenly influence. This propaganda was powerful, though the reality was more complex. In 31 BC, Octavian's forces, led at sea by Agrippa, defeated Antony and Cleopatra at Actium. The next year, Alexandria fell. Antony and Cleopatra died by suicide. Egypt became a Roman province. Octavian stood alone. After generations of civil war, Rome was exhausted. The Republic's forms still existed, but real power now belonged to one man. Octavian would take a new name, Augustus, and Rome would enter the age of emperors. Augustus was careful. That was one of his greatest strengths. He understood what Caesar had not fully solved. Rome could accept one-man rule if it was disguised as restoration, tradition, legality, and peace. The Romans hated the word king, so Augustus did not call himself king. He presented himself as princeps, the first citizen. He claimed to have restored the republic. Magistrates, senate, assemblies, and old titles remained, but beneath the familiar forms, a new system had been created. Augustus controlled the armies, key provinces, immense wealth, religious authority, and the symbolic center of Roman public life. His power was assembled from republican titles and privileges, but together they made him something new, an emperor in all but the later, more obvious sense. The age of Augustus brought stability after chaos. For many Romans, that mattered more than constitutional purity. Civil wars had killed fathers, sons, patrons, clients, senators, soldiers, and farmers. The Mediterranean had been shaken for decades. Augustus offered peace, order, continuity. He reorganized provinces, reformed the army, established the Praetorian Guard, encouraged moral legislation, rebuilt temples, and transformed Rome's physical appearance. He famously claimed to have found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. The phrase is not simply architectural, it is political. Augustus wanted Rome to look like the capital of the world it had become. Poets flourished under his age. Virgil, Horace, Ovid, Propertius, and others. Virgil's Aeneid connected Rome to Troy, destiny, sacrifice, and Augustan order. In the figure of Aeneas, carrying his father and household gods from burning Troy, Romans found an image of piety and mission. Augustus also understood memory. He shaped the story Rome told about itself. The past civil wars became the painful road to peace. His victory became providence. His rule became renewal. But peace had limits. On the frontiers, Rome still fought. In Germany, Roman ambitions met disaster in AD 9, when 3 legions under Varus were destroyed in the Teutoburg forest by Germanic forces led by Arminius, a man familiar with Roman methods. The loss shocked Rome deeply. Augustus, according to later accounts, mourned the legions bitterly. Rome would campaign beyond the Rhine again, but it did not permanently absorb Free Germany. The Rhine and Danube became major frontier lines. At home, Augustus faced a problem that would haunt the empire: succession. A system built around one man needed a way to continue after him without civil war. Augustus outlived many chosen heirs. In the end, power passed to Tiberius, his stepson, in AD 14. The Julio-Claudian dynasty began. Tiberius was capable, but increasingly withdrawn and suspicious. Caligula, remembered as erratic and tyrannical, exposed the dangers of imperial power when combined with youth, instability, and court politics. Claudius, underestimated because of physical and social awkwardness, proved an able administrator and conquered Britain in AD 43. Nero, the last of the Julio-Claudians, began with promise but became associated with artistic vanity, political murder, extravagance, and the Great Fire of Rome in AD 64. Whether he caused the fire is doubtful, but his reputation suffered severely. Christians, a small but growing religious group, were blamed and persecuted after the fire. Nero's fall in AD 68 led to the Year of the Four Emperors: Galba, Otho, Vitellius, Vespasian. Civil war returned, revealing that emperors could now be made outside Rome by armies. The secret of empire, as one ancient writer observed, had been revealed. An emperor could be made elsewhere than in the capital. Vespasian, founder of the Flavian dynasty, restored stability. His reign, and those of his sons, Titus and Domitian, left deep marks on Rome. The Colosseum, begun under Vespasian and opened under Titus, rose on land associated with Nero's extravagant palace. It was a political statement. Space once taken by a ruler's private luxury was returned to public spectacle. The Colosseum was magnificent and brutal. There, crowds watched gladiatorial combat, animal hunts, executions, and staged displays of Roman power over nature, criminals, enemies, and death itself. We should not romanticize it. The amphitheater was an architectural wonder built around suffering. Rome could create beauty, order, law, and engineering brilliance. It could also make violence into public entertainment. Both truths belong to Rome. The 1st and 2nd centuries AD are often remembered as the high age of the Roman Empire, not peaceful in the sense of no war. The frontiers still burned, rebellions still erupted, emperors still feared plots, armies still marched. But compared with the civil wars that had shattered the Republic, and the crises that would later come, this was an age of remarkable stability across much of the Mediterranean. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, was not gentle peace. It was peace enforced by legions, taxes, roads, governors, law, and imperial authority. But for many cities within the empire, it meant safer trade, urban growth, monumental building, and a shared political order across immense distances. Under emperors such as Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, Rome reached some of its most admired forms. Trajan, ruling from AD 98 to 117, expanded the empire to its greatest territorial extent. His conquest of Dacia brought wealth, especially from mines, and his campaigns in the east temporarily pushed Roman power into Armenia, Mesopotamia, and beyond. Trajan's column in Rome, with its spiraling reliefs, still tells in stone the story Rome wanted remembered. Disciplined legions, imperial command, barbarian enemies, construction, movement, sacrifice, and victory. Hadrian, who ruled from AD 117 to 138, represented a different imperial instinct. He consolidated. He travelled widely. He inspected provinces and armies. He strengthened frontiers. In Britain, Hadrian's wall stretched across the northern landscape, not as an absolute border between civilization and chaos, but as a controlled military zone, a statement of imperial presence, movement, taxation, and security. Imagine a cold wind moving over the stones, soldiers from distant lands standing guard at the edge of the Roman world, letters written on wooden tablets, boots in mud, smoke from fort fires, Latin words spoken beside Celtic, Germanic, and other tongues. The empire was never culturally uniform. It was a vast mosaic. In North Africa, cities flourished with forums, baths, theatres, and farms that supplied grain and oil. In Gaul, local elites adopted Roman styles while preserving regional identities. In Spain, mines, cities, and roads linked the peninsula to imperial systems. In the Greek East, ancient cities such as Athens, Ephesus, Antioch, and Alexandria remained centres of culture, trade, and learning. In Egypt, the Nile continued its ancient rhythm under Roman administration, feeding the empire with grain. In Syria and Judea, Roman power met old kingdoms, temple traditions, trade routes, and religious tensions. Romanization was not a simple process of people becoming identical Romans. It was layered. Local elites learned Latin in the West. Greek remained dominant in the East. Roman law and citizenship spread gradually, and imperial cult practices tied loyalty to ritual. Cities competed for status. Wealthy patrons funded baths, theatres, roads, temples, and inscriptions. To live under Rome was to live within a hierarchy of rights, privileges, burdens, and opportunities. Citizenship was one of Rome's most powerful tools. At first limited, it expanded over centuries. Soldiers who served in auxiliary units could earn citizenship. Local elites might gain it. Entire communities could be granted it. Finally, in AD 212, the Emperor Caracalla issued the Constitutio Antoniana, granting Roman citizenship to nearly all free inhabitants of the empire. By then, citizenship had changed in meaning, but the gesture still revealed Rome's long pattern: power through incorporation. The Roman city was a world of stone, water, sound, smell, and movement. A visitor entering a provincial city might see a grid of streets, a forum, temples, baths, fountains, shops, workshops, houses, apartment blocks, theatres, amphitheatres, and city gates. Aqueducts carried water across valleys and into urban centres. Sewers removed waste imperfectly but impressively. Bathhouses were social spaces as much as hygienic ones, places of conversation, exercise, business, leisure, and status. Roman roads connected this world. They were not all paved highways in the same way modern imagination sometimes pictures them, but the major roads were durable, measured, engineered, and essential. Milestones marked distances. Couriers moved official messages. Merchants carried wine, oil, garum, pottery, textiles, metals, grain, and luxuries. Soldiers marched from one frontier to another. And above all, stood the army. The Roman legion was not merely a battlefield formation, it was an institution. It built roads, forts, bridges, walls, and camps. It spread habits, language, and discipline. It guarded frontiers and sometimes made emperors. During the High Empire, The legions were stationed mostly along borders: the Rhine, Danube, Euphrates, desert zones, and Britain's northern lines. Many soldiers spent more time building and patrolling than fighting great battles. Their lives were repetitive, regulated, and tied to the slow machinery of imperial control. But even in this golden age, the empire carried burdens. Succession remained uncertain. Court politics could be deadly. Taxes could be heavy. Slavery remained central. Provincial exploitation persisted. Rebellions could be crushed with terrifying violence. In Judea, tensions between Roman rule and Jewish resistance erupted in major revolts. The First Jewish Revolt led to the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in AD 70 under Titus. Later, the Bar Kokhba revolt in the 2nd century brought further devastation. The Pax Romana was real, but not universal comfort. It was an imperial order. And imperial orders always ask, peace for whom, and at what cost? To speak only of emperors and battles would be to miss most of Rome. Because the Roman world was also made of ordinary mornings. A baker waking before dawn, a child tracing letters on a wax tablet, a slave carrying water, a woman arranging household accounts, a merchant unlocking a shop, a soldier repairing a sandal, a farmer watching the sky for rain, a scribe sharpening a reed pen, a priest preparing a sacrifice, a widow placing flowers at a tomb. In the city of Rome itself, life was crowded, noisy, and layered by class. The wealthy lived in domus, houses arranged around atria and courtyards, decorated with frescoes, mosaics, and family symbols. The very rich owned villas in the countryside and along the Bay of Naples, where sea air, gardens, libraries, and dining rooms displayed refined leisure. The poor often lived in insulae, apartment blocks that could be cramped, dangerous, and vulnerable to fire or collapse. Streets were busy with carts, animals, vendors, clients, beggars, officials, and crowds. Rome was a city of grandeur and discomfort, marble and mud, ceremony and smell. Food varied by class and region. Many people lived on grains, bread, porridge, olives, legumes, vegetables, cheese, and wine diluted with water. Family life was structured by law, custom, and hierarchy. The paterfamilias, the male head of household, held strong legal authority, though real family relationships could be more complex and affectionate than legal formulas suggest. Women's status varied across time, class, and circumstance. Elite women could wield influence through family networks, property, patronage, and court politics, even when formal political office was closed to them. Marriage could be arranged for alliance, wealth, and status, especially among elites. Children were cherished, disciplined, educated, and vulnerable. Infant mortality was high. Childhood could be brief. Tomb inscriptions sometimes preserve heartbreaking tenderness. Parents mourning children whose names would otherwise have vanished entirely. Education depended on wealth. Boys of elite families studied reading, writing, rhetoric, literature, law, and Greek culture. Rhetoric was especially important for public life. To speak well was to act in the world. A Roman aristocrat's voice could win trials, offices, reputations, and allies. Religion was woven into daily life. Roman religion was not centered on personal belief in the modern sense. It was ritual, relationship, obligation, and order between humans and gods. The household honored lares and penates, protective spirits connected to family and home. The state honored Jupiter, Juno, Minerva, Mars, Vesta, and many others. Priests, augurs, Vestal virgins, sacrifices, festivals, vows, omens, and calendars formed a sacred structure around public life. Rome also absorbed gods. As it expanded, it encountered Greek deities, Egyptian Isis, Persian Mithras, Syrian cults, Anatolian Cybele, and many local traditions. The empire's religious world was plural, practical, and constantly changing. For many, religion was not a single exclusive identity. A person might honor household gods, participate in civic festivals, respect local deities, and join a mystery cult promising deeper symbolic meaning. This pluralism would later face a profound challenge from Christianity, which claimed exclusive devotion to one god and gradually transformed the religious landscape of the empire. Entertainment was equally varied. Theatre, chariot racing, gladiatorial games, animal hunts, public festivals, baths, gambling, storytelling, music, and dining all filled Roman leisure. Chariot racing, especially at the Circus Maximus, attracted passionate fans. The racing factions could inspire loyalty comparable to modern sports teams. Gladiators occupied a strange space. Many were enslaved, condemned, prisoners, or professionals of low status. Yet successful gladiators could become famous. Their bodies were trained for spectacle. Their danger became entertainment. Their courage was admired even as their lives were consumed by a brutal system. Roman society depended heavily on slavery. This must never be softened. Enslaved people worked in homes, fields, mines, workshops, ships, schools, estates, and imperial service. Some were treated with relative trust and could eventually be freed. Others endured extreme violence, especially in mines and large agricultural estates. Freed people could become important in business and administration, but they carried the marks of their former status. The Roman world was brilliant, but it was not kind. Its achievements were built in part by people who had no freedom. To understand Rome honestly, we must hold both its grandeur and its cruelty in the same quiet hand, and perhaps, as night deepens, this is where ancient history becomes most human. Not in the triumph of a general, not in the decree of an emperor, but in the small traces of lives that passed through Roman time. A name scratched into a wall, a shopping list, a soldier's letter home, a child's toy, a loaf of bread carbonized in the ash of Pompeii, a footprint in ancient dust. These are the softest voices of Rome, and they are often the ones that remain with us longest. The reign of Marcus Aurelius is often imagined through the figure of the philosopher-emperor, a ruler in a cloak, a thinker at the edge of the world, a man writing private reflections in Greek, while military camps, cold frontiers, and imperial burdens pressed around him. Marcus Aurelius ruled from AD 161 to 180, much of it alongside Lucius Verus at first, and later with his son Commodus as co-emperor. His Meditations, never intended as a public book in the way we read it now, reveal a mind seeking discipline, humility, acceptance, and moral clarity. But his reign was not peaceful. War with Parthia in the east brought Roman victory, but also, perhaps, helped spread a devastating epidemic known as the Antonine Plague. The disease moved through the empire with soldiers, merchants, and travelers. Its exact nature remains debated, but its impact was severe. It weakened populations, disrupted economies, and left marks on Roman society. Then came pressure along the northern frontiers. Germanic and Sarmatian groups crossed the Danube, forcing Marcus Aurelius to spend long years campaigning in difficult conditions. The emperor, who might have preferred philosophy, found himself tied to military necessity. Imagine him in a frontier camp, not in marble Rome, not among libraries and porticos, but near the Danube, under a cold sky, with reports arriving by lamplight. Troop movements, supply shortages, diplomatic messages, illness, desertion, loyalty, fear. His reflections on impermanence feel different in such a setting. All things pass. Fame passes. Bodies pass. Cities pass. Empires too, though emperors rarely say so aloud. When Marcus died in AD 1880, power passed to Commodus. Later Roman memory often treated this moment as the end of the Golden Age and the beginning of decline. That is too simple, but not meaningless. Commodus did not have his father's discipline. His reign became associated with extravagance, suspicion, theatrical self-presentation, and political instability. He presented himself as a new Hercules. He performed in the arena. He renamed months and institutions after himself. Behind the spectacle, court politics grew dangerous. Commodus was assassinated in AD 1902. His death opened another civil war. The empire had survived bad emperors before, but something was changing. The scale of the empire was enormous. The army was expensive. Frontiers were under pressure. The political system still lacked a stable, universally accepted method of succession, and the legions, stationed across the empire, remained the ultimate source of imperial power. After Commodus came the year of the 5 emperors. Pertinax tried to restore discipline and was murdered by the Praetorian Guard. Didius Julianus infamously gained power after the Guard offered the empire in a kind of auction. Provincial armies then supported rival claimants. Septimius Severus, commander from the Danubian region, emerged victorious. Severus founded a new dynasty and strengthened the military basis of imperial rule. He increased soldiers' pay and favored the army. On his deathbed, he is said to have advised his sons to enrich the soldiers and scorn everyone else. Whether exact or not, the phrase captures a truth of the Severan age. Imperial power leaned more openly on military loyalty. The Severan dynasty produced capable and troubled rulers. Caracalla, remembered for violence and for granting citizenship broadly in AD 212, murdered his brother Geta and ruled harshly. Elagabalus scandalized Roman elites with religious and court behavior they considered outrageous. Severus Alexander, the last of the dynasty, was young and influenced by advisors, and his inability to satisfy military expectations contributed to his murder in AD 235. With his death, the empire entered the crisis of the 3rd century. The crisis of the 3rd century was one of the most dangerous periods in Roman history. From AD 235 to 284, the empire endured rapid turnover of emperors, civil wars, invasions, economic strain, plague, currency debasement, and temporary fragmentation. Emperors rose by military support and fell by assassination. Some ruled only months. The frontiers shook. In the east, the Sasanian Persian Empire replaced the Parthians as Rome's great rival. The Sasanians were powerful, organized, and ambitious. In AD 260, the Roman Emperor Valerian was captured by the Persian king Shapur I, an unprecedented humiliation. In the north and west, Goths, Franks, Alemanni, and other groups raided or invaded across borders. The Danube and Rhine frontiers became zones of constant stress. The empire even split in practice. In the west, the Gallic Empire emerged under Postumus and his successors, controlling Gaul, Britain, and parts of Spain for a time. In the east, Palmyra, under Queen Zenobia, expanded its power over Syria, Egypt, and parts of Asia Minor. These breakaway states were not simply barbarian invasions. They were Roman regional responses to imperial weakness. Local power centers took control because the central government could not protect or manage everything effectively. It is easy to imagine Rome as a single machine, but in crisis, the machine revealed its joints. Provinces needed defense, armies needed pay, cities needed grain, merchants needed stable coinage, farmers needed security. When the center faltered, regions improvised, yet Rome did not collapse. A series of soldier emperors from the Danubian military world fought to restore unity. Claudius II Gothicus won victories against Gothic forces. Aurelian, ruling from AD 270 to 275, was especially important. He defeated Palmyra, restored the East, reconquered the Gallic Empire, and earned the title Restitutor Orbis, Restorer of the World. Aurelian also built new walls around Rome. That detail is quietly powerful. For centuries, Rome had been so dominant that its old walls seemed unnecessary. Now the capital itself needed stronger defenses. The psychological world of Rome had changed. The city that once expanded without fear now looked inward and fortified itself. The crisis transformed the empire. The old patterns of the high empire could not simply return. The army became more mobile and more expensive. Imperial ceremony grew more formal. The emperor became more distant, sacred, and militarized. The economy strained under taxation and inflation. Cities faced new pressures. Local elites sometimes found civic responsibilities burdensome rather than honorable. By the time Diocletian came to power in AD 284, the empire needed deep restructuring. Diocletian was not a romantic figure. He was a reformer of hard edges. He understood that one emperor could not easily manage the entire Roman world. So he created the Tetrarchy, the rule of 4. 2 senior emperors called Augusti, and 2 junior emperors called Caesars. The idea was to divide responsibility, secure succession, and improve frontier defense. The empire was not divided as a permanent east and west yet, but administration became more regional. Diocletian also reorganized provinces, expanded bureaucracy, reformed taxation, and attempted to stabilize prices and coinage. His reforms were heavy, intrusive, and not always successful, but they helped the empire survive. He also launched the last great persecution of Christians, seeking religious unity through traditional cult and imperial authority. But Christianity would not disappear. Indeed, within a generation, the empire's relationship with Christianity would be transformed by one of the most consequential rulers in Roman history, Constantine. Constantine emerged from the struggles after the Tetrarchy began to break down. Diocletian had tried to create orderly succession, but ambition, bloodlines, armies, and regional power proved stronger than constitutional design. After Diocletian's abdication, rival claimants fought for control. Constantine, son of Constantius Chlorus, was proclaimed emperor by troops in Britain in AD 306. Over the following years, he maneuvered through alliances and wars. His most famous moment came in AD 312, before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge against Maxentius. Later Christian accounts describe Constantine seeing a heavenly sign connected to the Christian god and adopting it as a symbol of victory. The exact nature of his vision and personal beliefs remains complex, but the result is clear. Constantine defeated Maxentius and entered Rome as a ruler increasingly associated with Christianity. In AD 314, the Edict of Milan, issued by Constantine and Licinius, granted toleration to Christians and restored confiscated property. Christianity moved from persecuted religion to legally accepted faith. Over time, Constantine favored the church with patronage, privileges, basilicas, and imperial attention. He also involved himself in church disputes, most famously calling the Council of Nicaea in AD 325 to address the Arian controversy over the nature of Christ. This did not instantly make the empire Christian in every heart, village, and institution. Traditional cults continued. Religious change was gradual, uneven, and contested, but the direction had shifted. A faith once associated with marginal communities, martyrs, bishops, scriptures, and house gatherings, now stood close to imperial power. Constantine also founded a new imperial capital on the site of Byzantium, Constantinople, New Rome, dedicated in AD 330. It stood on the Bosporus, commanding routes between Europe and Asia, the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. Its location was extraordinary, defensible, wealthy, strategic, and symbolically powerful. Rome remained sacred in memory, but the empire's center of gravity was moving east. Constantine's reign marks a transformation, not an ending. The Roman Empire did not simply become something else overnight. It remained Roman in law, administration, army, taxation, titles, and imperial ideology. But Christianity in Constantinople changed the meaning of Roman identity. After Constantine, the empire passed through more dynastic struggles. His sons divided power. Civil wars continued. Julian, later called the apostate by Christians, attempted to revive traditional pagan religious life during his brief reign from AD 361 to 363. His death during a Persian campaign ended that effort. The later 4th century brought growing pressure on the frontiers, especially from Gothic groups affected by movements of peoples beyond Rome's borders, including the advance of the Huns. In AD 376, Goths seeking refuge crossed the Danube into Roman territory. Mistreatment, hunger, corruption, and tension led to revolt. In AD 378, at the Battle of Adrianople, the Eastern Emperor Valens was defeated and killed by Gothic forces. Adrianople shocked the empire. It revealed that Rome could no longer assume easy superiority over large organized groups inside or near its borders. Theodosius IV, who later ruled the whole empire, made agreements with Gothic groups and increasingly tied imperial unity to Nicene Christianity. In AD 380, the Edict of Thessalonica declared Nicene Christianity the official faith of the empire. Traditional pagan practices were increasingly restricted in the following years. When Theodosius died in AD 395, the empire was divided between his sons, Arcadius in the east and Honorius in the west. This division was not meant to end Roman unity in theory, but in practice, the eastern and western courts increasingly followed different paths. The Eastern Empire, wealthier and more urbanized, centered on Constantinople, had stronger fiscal resources. The Western Empire faced severe pressures, weaker revenues, vulnerable frontiers, internal power struggles, and increasing reliance on barbarian military leaders and federate troops. The old city of Rome still carried immense symbolic weight, but the Western imperial government often operated from other centers, especially Ravenna, more defensible among marshes. And then, in AD 410, something happened that echoed through the Mediterranean world. Rome was sacked. The sack of Rome in AD 410 by the Visigoths under Alaric was not the end of the Roman Empire, but it was a wound to the imagination. For nearly 8 centuries, Rome had not been taken by a foreign enemy. The city that had conquered nations now saw armed outsiders within its streets. The sack was limited compared with later destructions, but its symbolic force was enormous. Christians and pagans debated its meaning. Some pagans blamed the abandonment of the old gods. Christian thinkers such as Augustine responded by distinguishing the earthly city from the city of God. The Western Empire staggered on, But the 5th century was harsh. Vandals crossed into Gaul, then Spain, then North Africa, where they captured Carthage in AD 439. This was a major blow. North Africa was one of the West's richest regions and a crucial source of grain and tax revenue. Without Africa, the Western imperial state became poorer and weaker. The Huns, under Attila, created further terror in the mid-5th century. Attila's empire was not Roman, but it exploited Roman diplomacy, tribute, and weakness. In AD 451, a coalition including Roman forces under Aetius and Visigoths confronted Attila at the Catalonian plains. The battle was fierce and strategically important, though not the simple salvation myth later stories sometimes made it. Attila invaded Italy in AD 452, but withdrew. He died in AD 453, and Hunnic power soon fragmented. Still, the West did not recover. In AD 455, Rome was sacked again, this time by the Vandals. The word vandalism would much later derive from their name, though the historical Vandals were more complex than the stereotype suggests. Western emperors became increasingly weak, often controlled by military strongmen. Some were children, some were puppets, some ruled only briefly. Real power lay with generals, court factions, barbarian federate leaders, and regional authorities. In AD 476, the Germanic military leader Odoacer deposed the young Western emperor Romulus Augustulus. The imperial insignia were sent to Constantinople. Traditionally, this date is used to mark the fall of the Western Roman Empire, but history rarely ends so neatly. For many people living in Italy, life did not change overnight. Taxes, landholding, bishops, local elites, Roman law, and administrative habits continued in altered forms. Odoacer ruled as king in Italy, nominally acknowledging the Eastern Emperor. Later, Theodoric the Ostrogoth would rule Italy with a blend of Gothic military power and Roman administrative continuity. The Eastern Roman Empire continued. Its people called themselves Romans. Its emperor ruled from Constantinople. Its laws, armies, diplomacy, theology, and ceremonies carried Roman identity forward for centuries. Modern historians often call it Byzantine, especially for its medieval phases. But that name was not how its people primarily understood themselves. They were Romioi, Romans. In the 6th century, the Emperor Justinian attempted to restore imperial control over lost Western territories. His generals Belisarius and Narses reconquered North Africa, Italy, and parts of Spain. Justinian also sponsored the codification of Roman law in the Corpus Juris Civilis, one of the most influential legal compilations in world history. In Constantinople, the Hagia Sophia rose after the Nika riots, a vast domed church that seemed to suspend heaven in stone and light. But Justinian's reconquests were costly. War devastated Italy. Plague struck the empire. New enemies and pressures emerged. Over time, the Eastern Roman world transformed in language, culture, territory, and religion, becoming what we call Byzantine civilization. Yet the Roman thread did not break. It changed color. It passed through Greek speech, Christian theology, imperial ceremony, and medieval warfare. It endured until Constantinople itself fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453. In that sense, Rome's story did not end in 476. It echoed for nearly another 1,000 years in the East. And even after 1453, Rome remained alive in law, architecture, politics, language, religion, literature, and imagination. What remains of Rome? At first, the answer seems easy. Ruins remain: the Colosseum, the Pantheon, aqueducts crossing lonely landscapes, roads beneath modern roads, walls in Britain, temples in southern France, amphitheaters in Spain and North Africa, mosaics, coins, inscriptions, statues, helmets, lamps, rings, bones, tools, and fragments of pottery. But Rome's deeper remains are less visible. The Latin language became the ancestor of the Romance languages: Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, and others. Latin shaped law, science, religion, education, and literature for centuries. Roman law influenced legal traditions across Europe and beyond. Ideas of contracts, property, citizenship, legal procedure, and codification carried long after the empire's political forms changed. Roman engineering inspired later builders. Roman political vocabulary still surrounds us: Senate, Republic, Dictator, Consul, Veto, Forum, Province, Census, Civic, Imperial. Christianity, transformed within the Roman Empire, carried Roman structures of organization, language, and geography into medieval and modern worlds. The city of Rome became the center of the Latin Church. The dream of Rome haunted kings, emperors, popes, republicans, revolutionaries, dictators, architects, poets, and historians. Charlemagne was crowned emperor in Rome in AD 800. The Holy Roman Empire claimed a Roman inheritance. Renaissance artists studied Roman ruins. Modern republics borrowed Roman symbols. Capitals, senates, eagles, arches, domes, columns, and Latin mottos still appear in public life. But Rome's legacy is not only admiration, it is also warning. Rome teaches how republics can be weakened by inequality, militarized ambition, political violence, and the erosion of trust. It teaches how empires can build roads, laws, and cities, while also exploiting, enslaving, and conquering. It teaches how power can absorb diversity, but also crush resistance. It teaches how institutions can endure for centuries and still be vulnerable to pressures they fail to resolve. It teaches how memory can be shaped by those who write, build, and win. And yet, Rome also teaches resilience. It survived kings, republic, empire, civil wars, invasions, plagues, fires, defeats, reforms, divisions, and transformations. It was never one unchanging thing. Rome became great because it adapted, and Rome fell, in the West, partly because adaptation became harder than the pressures surrounding it. So as we come toward the end of tonight's journey, imagine once more the Tiber River. At the beginning, it flowed past huts and cattle. Later, it flowed past temples, bridges, warehouses, palaces, and crowds. It saw kings, consuls, dictators, emperors, bishops, invaders, pilgrims, artists, and tourists. It carried reflections of fire, marble, moonlight, and ruin. The river remained. Rome changed. And perhaps that is the quietest truth of history. Civilizations rise not as monuments, but as human arrangements. They are made of decisions, fears, hopes, labor, hunger, ambition, faith, memory, and time. They seem eternal while they stand, then one day they become ruins. And one day, those ruins become lessons. Tonight, ancient Rome has passed before us like a long procession in fading torchlight. The shepherds of Latium, the senators in white togas, the legions on winter roads, the ships off Sicily, Hannibal in the Alps, Caesar at the Rubicon, Augustus beneath marble porticos, the crowds of the Colosseum, the soldiers on Hadrian's Wall, the merchants of Alexandria, the bishops of late antiquity, the emperors of Constantinople, the last Western throne, quietly emptied. And beyond them all, the echo of a city that became a world. If you are still awake, thank you for traveling through this long Roman night with me. And before sleep takes you completely, remember to write in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is in your city right now. Perhaps someone else, far away, will read your city name tomorrow and feel, for a moment, that this quiet journey through time was shared. Now let the marble fade, let the torches dim, let the roads grow silent, and let the ancient city rest beneath the stars. Long before Rome became the name by which an empire measured the world, Italy was a land of many peoples. It was not yet Roman. It was not yet united. It was a peninsula of mountains, valleys, plains, forests, rivers, coastlines, sanctuaries, villages, and cities, speaking different languages and honoring different gods. To the north lay the Po Valley, broad and fertile, open to movements from beyond the Alps. Etruscan cities, Celtic peoples, and later Roman colonies would all leave marks there. In central Italy, the Apennine Mountains shaped life into valleys and uplands, creating communities that could be fiercely independent. Along the western coast, contact with the wider Mediterranean brought trade, ideas, and luxury goods. In the south, Greek cities shone like fragments of another world. Tarentum, Cumae, Neapolis, Sybaris, Croton, and others, part of what later Romans called Magna Graecia, Great Greece. Before Rome ruled Italy, Italy taught Rome. From the Etruscans, Rome learnt forms of urban life, ritual authority, spectacle, and perhaps many symbols that later looked unmistakably Roman. The Etruscan cities were wealthy and sophisticated, connected by trade to the Greeks, Phoenicians, and other Mediterranean peoples. They built temples, drained land, worked metal, painted tombs, interpreted omens, and governed through aristocratic city-states. Their tomb paintings show banquets, dancers, musicians, athletes, mourners, and underworld figures. They remind us that ancient Italy was not a blank stage waiting for Rome to enter. It was already full of color, belief and memory. To the south, the Greeks brought another kind of influence. They brought the alphabetic world of inscriptions and literature. They brought temples with columns facing the sea. They brought myths of heroes, philosophical questions, coinage, pottery, athletic culture, and political models ranging from aristocracy to tyranny to forms of citizen government. Greek colonies in southern Italy were not simply outposts. They were vibrant cities, sometimes richer and more refined than early Rome could have imagined. Rome grew between these worlds, not fully Etruscan, not Greek, not isolated Latin village. It was a receiver, borrower, adapter, and eventually master. The Latin peoples of Latium shared language and cults with Rome, but they were also rivals. Latin communities formed leagues and alliances. They worshipped at shared sanctuaries. They fought, negotiated, intermarried, and competed. Early Rome's struggle for survival was often a struggle against peoples who were culturally close, not distant strangers. This is important to remember. Rome did not first conquer a foreign world. Rome first conquered neighbors, communities that knew its roads, hills, gods, markets, and dialects. The Sabines were close enough to be woven into Rome's own origin stories. The Latins were kin and rivals. The Volsci and Equi pressed from the hills. The Etruscan cities to the north represented both threat and influence. The Samnites later would become Rome's great mountain adversaries. If we imagine early Italy at dusk, we should not imagine silence. We should hear many languages, Latin prayers at rustic shrines, Etruscan ritual words spoken by priests studying lightning, Greek merchants bargaining near harbours, Oscan-speaking warriors in upland settlements, cattle bells in mountain pastures, iron tools striking wood, the creak of wagons, the splash of oars near the coast, and somewhere beside the Tiber, a small Roman community, learning from all of them. Rome's greatness would later seem inevitable to Roman writers, but it was not inevitable. Many other peoples might have shaped Italy's future. An Etruscan-led peninsula was possible. A Samnite-dominated interior was possible. Greek influence in the south might have extended farther. Carthage might have controlled more of the western Mediterranean. Rome's rise was not destiny in the strict sense. It was the result of geography, institutions, military adaptation, political flexibility, ruthlessness, endurance, and many moments when defeat did not become final. The Romans later looked back and placed their beginnings within a grand chain of fate. Troy, Aeneas, Alba Longa, Romulus, Mars, Venus, Jupiter's will. But beneath myth, we can see a harder, earthier story. A hill settlement becoming a city becoming a regional power learning how to bind defeated peoples into its system, a system becoming an empire, and that empire, in time, claiming that the gods had intended it all along. The Roman kings stand at the edge of history and legend. They are half-seen figures, like silhouettes in morning fog. Roman tradition remembered 7 of them, and each one seemed to give the city a piece of itself. Romulus gave boundaries, arms, and the first harsh definition of Roman authority. Numa Pompilius gave sacred time, calendars, priesthoods, rituals, and the idea that Rome's relationship with the gods required order, precision, and memory. Tullus Hostilius gave warlike expansion, the destruction of Alba Longa, and the absorption of old Latin prestige into Rome. Ancus Marcius gave bridges, river power, and the movement toward the sea. Tarquinius Priscus gave Etruscan grandeur, public works, and royal display. Servius Tullius gave census, classes, walls, and a deeper organization of citizens for war and voting. Tarquinius Superbus gave tyranny, pride, and the lesson Rome swore never to forget. Whether each king did exactly what later tradition claimed is uncertain, but the sequence itself tells a story. Rome imagined that a city needed many foundations: military, religious, legal, urban, social, and moral. A city was not only walls, it was ritual, it was memory, it was rank, it was drainage, it was roads, it was the measured counting of citizens. It was the right to command and the fear of command becoming too great. The regal period also gave Rome some of its deepest anxieties. The king could defend the city. The king could build temples. The king could lead armies. But the king could also become arrogant, violent, and unaccountable. This fear became central to Roman political identity. The expulsion of the kings was remembered not merely as a change of government, but as a moral liberation. The last king's family, in Roman memory, committed abuses that made monarchy intolerable. The noblewoman Lucretia became a tragic symbol of violated honor and political awakening. Lucius Junius Brutus became the founder of liberty, the man who helped drive out the Tarquins and establish the Republic. The story is dramatic, moralized, and shaped by later Roman values. But its emotional truth mattered enormously. Rome believed liberty had been born through resistance to kingship. That belief became a weapon in later politics. When a man grew too powerful, his enemies could whisper, "He wants to be king." When Caesar accepted honors too openly, the old fear returned. When emperors later ruled the world, they still avoided the hated title rex in Rome. The dead kings remained politically alive. The monarchy also left material traces in memory. The draining of the Forum through the Cloaca Maxima, associated with royal public works, symbolized the transformation of natural space into civic space. The great temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill, traditionally dedicated at the beginning of the Republic but rooted in the late regal period, became the sacred crown of Roman state religion. Triumphing generals would later end their processions there, offering thanks to Jupiter after victories that carried Roman arms to the edges of the known world. Imagine the Capitoline in the earliest days, not yet surrounded by imperial monuments, not yet visited by generations of foreign envoys, but already sacred, already elevated, already watching over the Forum below. The kingly age gave Rome an important paradox. Rome rejected kings, but Rome inherited kingly symbols. The fasces, rods bundled around an axe, carried before magistrates, expressed the power to punish and command. The curial chair marked high office. Purple-bordered garments signaled authority. Public spectacle, religious procession, and formalized hierarchy all survived the monarchy's fall. The Romans did not abolish power. They redistributed and renamed it. That is why the Republic, from the beginning, was not simply freedom, it was controlled authority. Power divided between offices. Power limited by time. Power watched by rivals. Power justified by tradition. And yet, as centuries would show, power has a way of gathering again, like water finding the lowest ground. The Roman Republic was not a simple machine. It was more like a living organism grown over time. Old customs remained beside new laws. Religious rituals surrounded political acts. Families competed through public offices. Citizens voted, but not equally. Magistrates commanded, but only for limited terms. The Senate advised, but its advice could become nearly irresistible. At the top of the annual magistracies stood the consuls. 2 consuls, elected each year, held imperium, the authority to command armies and preside over major public business. Each could check the other. Each knew that his time was short. In theory, this prevented monarchy from returning. In practice, it created intense competition, because a Roman noble had only a brief window to win glory. Below the consuls were praetors, often associated with judicial duties and military commands. Quaestors handled financial matters. Aediles managed public buildings, markets, games, and urban order. Censors, elected less frequently, conducted the census, reviewed the Senate's membership, and guarded public morals in a way that reveals how deeply Rome linked politics to reputation. The dictatorship was an emergency office, originally temporary and limited, used in moments of severe danger. A dictator could be appointed for a specific task, with extraordinary authority, but was expected to lay down power when the task was complete. This office would later become ominous when Sulla and Caesar used dictatorship in ways far beyond early patterns. The tribunes of the plebs were unique. Their persons were sacrosanct. They could intervene to protect plebeians. They could veto actions. They became guardians, agitators, reformers, and sometimes dangerous political players. In them, Rome created an office born from social struggle, not aristocratic generosity. The assemblies of the Roman people were also complex. Citizens voted in different assemblies organized by centuries, tribes, or plebeian status. These assemblies elected magistrates, passed laws, and decided important matters, yet the structure often gave disproportionate influence to the wealthy or to established groups. Roman politics valued the people, but it feared uncontrolled popular power. Roman politics valued aristocratic leadership, but it feared kingship. Roman politics valued tradition, but it constantly adapted. This balancing act worked for centuries because Rome remained, for a long time, able to expand outward while managing conflict inward. Conquest provided land, glory, and wealth. Defeated enemies became allies. The citizen body grew. Ambitious nobles competed for military commands that served the state while enhancing family honor. But the system carried seeds of crisis. Annual office encouraged short-term glory. Aristocratic competition encouraged escalation. Military command created personal loyalty. Provincial wealth encouraged corruption. Popular suffering created openings for reformers and demagogues. The mos maiorum, the custom of the ancestors, helped restrain behavior when men believed in it and feared public shame. But custom is fragile. It depends on shared belief. When enough ambitious men decide that victory matters more than restraint, unwritten rules begin to die. In the early and middle republic, however, the system still possessed energy. It could absorb demands, it could grant plebeian rights, it could extend citizenship, it could create colonies, it could recover from military disaster, it could discipline generals, it could make defeat temporary. That capacity for recovery would become Rome's most frightening strength in the eyes of its enemies. A Greek king, a Carthaginian general, a Samnite warrior, or a Gallic chieftain might win a battle against Rome. But winning a battle was not the same as defeating Rome. Rome came back, again and again, with new levies, new roads, new treaties, new commanders, new colonies, new laws, and always with the stubborn conviction that Roman endurance was itself a form of destiny. The conquest of Italy was Rome's great school. Before Rome could rule provinces across the sea, it had to learn how to survive among the peoples of the peninsula. These wars were often less famous than the later wars with Hannibal or Caesar's campaigns in Gaul, but they were essential. They taught Rome how to organize manpower, build alliances, plant colonies, negotiate surrender, punish rebellion, and use roads as instruments of power. One early trauma came from the Gauls. Around 390 BC, a Gallic force defeated the Romans at the Allia and entered the city. Rome was sacked. Later memory preserved the event as a humiliation never to be forgotten. The Capitoline Hill alone was said to have held out, saved in one story by sacred geese warning defenders of a night attack. Whether every detail is legendary or not, the memory mattered. Rome learned that the city itself could fall. The Gallic sack became a warning, a wound, and a motivation. Afterward, Rome strengthened itself. It expanded its military organization. It pushed outward with renewed determination. The Latin War in the 4th century BC ended with Rome dominating its Latin neighbors and reorganizing Latium under Roman control. Some communities were incorporated more closely, others were bound by treaty. Rome refused to allow a rival Latin league to exist independently. Kinship did not prevent domination. Then came the Samnite Wars. The Samnites were not soft opponents. They lived in rugged mountain regions and fought with flexibility and toughness. The wars between Rome and the Samnites stretched across decades, and Rome suffered serious setbacks. The humiliation at the Caudine Forks, where a Roman army was trapped and forced to pass under the yoke, became another painful memory. To pass under the yoke was symbolic submission. For proud Roman soldiers, it was unbearable. But again, humiliation did not end Rome. It hardened Rome. Against the Samnites, Rome learned to operate in more difficult terrain and to sustain long conflicts. It extended roads and colonies into strategic regions. It deepened its alliance system. Victory came not through a single glorious battle, but through persistence. By the early 3rd century BC, Rome faced Tarentum, a Greek city in southern Italy, and the intervention of Pyrrhus, king of Epirus. Pyrrhus came with a Hellenistic army and war elephants, and he defeated the Romans in battle more than once. But his victories were costly. The phrase Pyrrhic victory later came to mean a victory so expensive that it resembles defeat. Pyrrhus reportedly recognized that fighting Rome was unlike fighting other states. The Romans could lose armies and raise more. They could suffer defeat and refuse peace on unfavorable terms. Their manpower system and alliance network gave them depth. By 272 BC, Tarentum fell under Roman control. Rome now dominated the Italian peninsula south of the Po Valley. But the way Rome ruled Italy was as important as the fact of conquest. It did not create a single uniform system. It created layers. Roman citizens, Latin colonies, allied communities, municipia, colonies placed at strategic points, treaties defining obligations, local autonomy in some matters, Roman control in others. Above all, Italy supplied soldiers. This was Rome's hidden engine. When Rome went to war, it could draw not only on Roman citizens, but on allied manpower across Italy. The armies that defeated Carthage were not made only of men from the city of Rome. They were the product of a peninsula bound to Roman command. The price was resentment. Allies gave blood without always receiving equal rights. That resentment would eventually explode in the social war. But for centuries the system worked well enough to make Rome extraordinarily powerful. And roads tied it together. The Via Appia, the queen of roads, stretched southward, stone by stone, milestone by milestone. Other roads followed: Via Flaminia, Via Aurelia, Via Cassia, Via Salaria, and more. Roads made military movement faster. They made colonies more secure. They made communication more reliable. A road is more than stone. It is a promise of return. When Roman soldiers marched away, the road remained behind them. When officials travelled, the road carried authority. When merchants moved, the road carried profit. When rebels rose, the road carried legions back. By conquering Italy, Rome built the habits that would later sustain empire. It learnt to turn enemies into resources. It learnt to transform geography into administration. It learnt to make citizenship flexible enough to expand, but valuable enough to desire. And it learnt that conquest was not only the moment of victory. Conquest was what happened afterward. The treaty, the colony, the census, the road, the garrison, the marriage alliance. The local elite welcomed into Roman friendship. The rebellious town punished as a warning. The young men drafted into wars farther away than their grandparents could have imagined. Italy was Rome's first empire. And once Italy was bound to Rome, the sea became the next horizon. The First Punic War began almost accidentally, as many great wars do. Sicily was the immediate cause. The island lay between Italy and North Africa, rich, strategic, and contested. Greek cities, local powers, mercenaries, Carthaginian strongholds, and ambitious rulers all struggled there. Rome, newly dominant in Italy, could not ignore Sicily. Carthage, long established in western Sicily, could not abandon it. When conflict drew Rome across the Strait of Messina in 264 BC, a new chapter began. Rome stepped onto an island, then onto the sea. At first, Carthage should have had the advantage. Carthage was maritime. Its sailors knew western waters. Its fleets protected trade routes. Its harbours and naval traditions were old. Rome had courage, manpower, and discipline, but little experience in major naval war. Yet Rome's genius was not that it already knew everything. Rome's genius was that it learnt under pressure. The Romans built fleets, they trained rowers, they experimented, they used the corvus, a boarding bridge with a spike, to grip enemy ships and allow Roman soldiers to board. In this way, they tried to transform naval combat into infantry combat. The sea punished them. Storms destroyed fleets. Thousands drowned. The cost was immense. But Rome continued. In Sicily, the war dragged through sieges and campaigns. Cities changed hands. Mercenaries fought. Commanders came and went. Neither side could easily deliver the final blow. The war lasted 23 years. Think of that length. A child born at the beginning of the war could be a grown adult before peace came. Families could spend a generation hearing of Sicily, fleets, taxes, losses, and distant battles. In the end, Rome's persistence prevailed. After the naval victory near the Aegates Islands in 241 BC, Carthage accepted defeat. Sicily became Rome's first province. This was a turning point more subtle than a triumphal parade. A province was different from an Italian ally. It was territory governed outside Italy, subject to Roman magistrates and taxation. Rome now had to learn provincial administration, how to collect grain, manage local communities, send governors, hear disputes, and prevent rebellion while extracting wealth. Power overseas changed Roman habits. A governor in a province could become rich. Tax contractors could exploit. Local communities had to navigate Roman law, Roman greed, and Roman protection. The Mediterranean was becoming Roman, not simply through battle, but through paperwork, tribute, courts, and ships carrying grain. Carthage, meanwhile, was wounded, but not destroyed. After the war, it faced a brutal mercenary war, as unpaid soldiers rebelled in North Africa. Rome then took advantage of Carthaginian weakness to seize Sardinia and Corsica. To Carthaginians, this looked like opportunistic theft. A defeated enemy had been pressed further. Resentment deepened. Hamilcar Barca, one of Carthage's great commanders, turned to Spain, where Carthaginian power could be rebuilt through silver, soldiers, and new territory. His family carried a memory of humiliation. His son Hannibal would carry that memory across the Alps. The First Punic War made Rome a naval and provincial power, but the Second Punic War would test whether Rome could survive a genius on Italian soil. Hannibal's invasion of Italy was not merely bold. It was almost unimaginable to carry an army from Spain across southern Gaul, through hostile or uncertain lands, over the Alps, and down into Italy required not only courage but logistical brilliance, political calculation, and relentless will. The Alps themselves became part of the legend. Ancient writers described snow, avalanches, narrow tracks, attacks by mountain peoples, exhausted animals, and soldiers staring down from icy heights toward the promised plains of Italy. Even if some details were dramatized, the achievement remains astonishing. Hannibal arrived with a reduced army, but one hardened by ordeal. He also arrived with a strategy. He did not need to destroy Rome's walls immediately. He needed to destroy Rome's alliance system. If Italian allies abandoned Rome, the city could be isolated. If Rome's manpower network collapsed, its resilience would vanish. The first great battles made Hannibal seem like fate itself. At the Trebia, Roman aggression led them into disaster. At Lake Trasimene, fog and terrain became weapons. The Roman army marched into a trap along the lakeshore, and Hannibal's forces descended from the heights. Men were killed in confusion, pushed toward water, surrounded in mist and panic. Then came Cannae. It is difficult to overstate the shock of Cannae. The Romans gathered a massive army, determined to crush Hannibal by sheer force. Hannibal arranged his line with a center that could give ground and flanks that could hold. His cavalry defeated the Roman cavalry and struck from behind. The Roman infantry pressed inward, deeper and deeper, until they were surrounded. The battlefield became a killing ground. The loss was not only numerical, it was social. Roman senators died, equestrians died, allied soldiers died. Families across Italy were touched by grief. For days, perhaps weeks, Rome must have felt like a city holding its breath. Would Hannibal march on the city? Would allies defect? Would the gods abandon Rome? But Rome's response became legendary. The Senate refused to ransom many prisoners. It forbade public despair from overwhelming the state. It appointed commanders. It raised new troops, even from unusual sources. It maintained the forms of government. It kept the alliance system from total collapse. Some cities did defect, including Capua, one of Italy's greatest cities, but many remained loyal. That loyalty may have rested on fear, interest, habit, hatred of Carthage, local rivalries, or belief in Roman endurance. Whatever the mixture, Hannibal did not receive the cascade of defections he needed. Fabius Maximus became the symbol of delay. He avoided direct battle, shadowed Hannibal, cut off supplies, and accepted criticism from those who wanted quick revenge. His strategy was frustrating but wise. Rome had to stop giving Hannibal opportunities for annihilation. Meanwhile, war widened. In Spain, Roman commanders attacked Carthaginian power at its base. In Sicily, Syracuse became a center of conflict, and the great mathematician Archimedes was remembered for war machines that resisted Roman siege before the city fell. In Macedonia, alliances and diplomacy tied the war to the Greek East. The Second Punic War was not only Hannibal in Italy, it was a Mediterranean war. Scipio, later called Africanus, changed its direction. Young, bold, and intelligent, he took command in Spain after earlier Roman losses. He captured New Carthage, won support, defeated Carthaginian forces, and then carried the war to Africa. That decision forced Hannibal's recall. The final confrontation at Zama in 2002 BC brought two great commanders face to face. Scipio used flexible tactics and had strong cavalry support, including Numidian horsemen under Massinissa. Hannibal's elephants failed to break the Roman line decisively. The battle ended in Roman victory. Carthage submitted. The Second Punic War was over, but Rome had changed. It had seen an enemy in Italy for more than a decade. It had lost armies and continued. It had fought across seas. It had produced commanders whose fame could rival the state itself. It had learnt that existential danger could justify extraordinary commands, and it had emerged with a sense of invincibility that would shape future decisions. Hannibal did not destroy Rome, but he helped create the Rome that would destroy Carthage. After Hannibal, Rome could no longer return to being only the ruler of Italy. Victory had opened the world. Spain became a long-term theatre of conquest and resistance. Its mines and tribes, mountains and cities, would occupy Roman armies for generations. The Greek East drew Rome into wars against Macedon, the Seleucid Empire, and shifting alliances of cities and kings. Roman armies crossed into worlds shaped by Alexander the Great's legacy. They saw old Hellenistic capitals, royal courts, libraries, gymnasia, temples, and armies with traditions different from their own. At Cynocephalae in 197 BC, Roman legions defeated the Macedonian phalanx of Philip V, symbolically showing the flexibility of Roman manipular tactics against the once-feared formation inherited from Philip and Alexander. At Magnesia in 1980 BC, Rome and its allies defeated Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire. In 1608 BC, at Pydana, Rome defeated Perseus of Macedon, ending Macedonian independence. In 1406 BC, Corinth was destroyed. That same year, Carthage was destroyed. The coincidence is powerful. The West's great maritime rival and one of Greece's great cities fell under Roman violence in the same year. Rome had become the judge of the Mediterranean. But ruling the world changed the ruler. Wealth poured into Rome. Silver, slaves, art, books, statues, grain, luxury goods and provincial taxes. Triumphs displayed captured treasures and defeated kings. Roman nobles competed to show that their victories were greater than those of their ancestors. Greek art entered Roman houses. Greek slaves became tutors. Greek philosophy entered elite conversation. Some Romans embraced Hellenic culture eagerly. Others feared that luxury would soften old Roman discipline. Cato the Elder, stern defender of traditional values, warned against Greek influence even while Rome increasingly absorbed it. He represents a recurring Roman anxiety, that conquest might corrupt the conqueror. The economy also changed. Large estates expanded. Slave labor became more widespread. Small farmers struggled. War had taken them away from their fields for long periods. Cheap grain from provinces and competition from wealthy landowners created pressure. Veterans needed land. The city of Rome grew as displaced people. Freedmen, workers, traders, and migrants came in search of opportunity or survival. Urban crowds became politically important. The relationship between generals, soldiers, land, and political promises grew more dangerous. Provincial government created another problem. Governors held power far from Rome. Some were honorable, many exploited. A provincial command could repay debts, enrich friends, and fund political careers. Tax farmers, known as publicani, could squeeze local populations. Legal mechanisms existed against extortion, but justice depended on politics, influence, and willingness to prosecute. Empire brought glory. Empire brought corruption. Empire brought roads and law. Empire brought violence and extraction. The Republic had been built for a city-state expanding through Italy. Now it had to govern a Mediterranean empire. Its institutions were not designed for this scale. Annual magistracies were too short for complex provincial problems. Competition for office became more expensive. Military commands became more prestigious and prolonged. The Senate tried to manage everything through tradition and elite consensus, but consensus weakened as stakes grew higher. The Gracchi saw part of the problem. They understood that the citizen body, landholding, military service, and social justice were connected. Their deaths showed that reform itself had become dangerous. After them, politics no longer fully returned to the old restraints. Violence had entered the forum, and once violence enters politics, it rarely leaves quietly. The Roman Republic did not collapse in a single moment. It did not fall because one man crossed one river. It did not die only because Caesar was ambitious, or because senators were jealous, or because soldiers became loyal to generals. The Republic weakened slowly, like an old wall that still looks strong from a distance, while inside, the stones have begun to loosen. By the 2nd century BC, Rome had conquered widely, but the victory had created deep internal strain. The small farmers who had once formed the backbone of the citizen army faced pressure from debt, long military service, and competition with large estates. Wealthy landholders occupied public land and worked it with enslaved labor brought from Rome's wars. The city of Rome grew larger, noisier, and more dependent on grain and politics. Veterans needed land, the poor needed protection. The elite needed prestige, the state needed soldiers. These were not separate problems. They were one knot, and the Gracchus brothers tried to untie it. Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus came from one of Rome's noblest families. He was not an outsider. He was not a man without rank. His mother, Cornelia, daughter of Scipio Africanus, was remembered as a model of Roman virtue and education. Tiberius had seen military failure and social pressure. He understood that Rome's strength depended on citizens able to serve, and that land hunger was becoming dangerous. As tribune of the plebs in 1303 BC, he proposed enforcing limits on the occupation of public land and redistributing land to poorer citizens. In principle, the land was public. In practice, powerful families had treated much of it as their own. Tiberius's reform threatened wealth, habit, and aristocratic control. The Senate resisted. Tiberius turned to the popular assembly. The conflict escalated when another tribune vetoed him, and Tiberius pushed to remove that tribune from office. To his supporters, this was necessary to defend the people. To his opponents, it was a dangerous violation of sacred political norms. Here, the tragedy begins. The Republic depended not only on written law, but on restraint. On men accepting limits even when they disliked the result. On losers waiting for another election. On opponents remaining opponents, not enemies to be destroyed. When Tiberius sought re-election as tribune, his enemies claimed he wanted tyranny. A group of senators and supporters armed themselves with clubs and improvised weapons. In the violence that followed, Tiberius was killed, along with many of his followers. His body was thrown into the Tiber. Think of that image. A Roman tribune, a man from a noble family, killed in political violence. Not on a battlefield against Carthage, not in Gaul, not in Spain, but in Rome itself. The river that had seen the city's birth now carried the body of a reformer murdered by fellow citizens. Something had changed. 10 years later, his younger brother Gaius Gracchus entered politics with greater energy, broader vision, and perhaps a clearer sense of danger. Gaius was a brilliant speaker and organizer. He pursued land reform, grain measures, colonies, military reforms, and changes to the courts. He tried to build a coalition among the urban poor, equestrian order, Italian allies, and reform-minded citizens. He also touched one of the most sensitive questions in Roman life, the status of Rome's Italian allies. These allies fought in Roman armies, they died in Roman wars, they helped make Roman victories possible, but they did not share fully in Roman citizenship. Gaius saw that this was unjust and dangerous. Many Roman citizens, however, did not want to share their privileges. The reform movement weakened, opposition grew, violence returned. Gaius fled to the Aventine with supporters. The Senate passed an emergency decree, the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, urging magistrates to defend the state. In the confrontation that followed, Gaius died, likely by assisted suicide, and thousands of his supporters were executed or punished. The Gracchi were gone. Their reforms were partly dismantled, partly absorbed, partly remembered, but their true legacy was deeper. They revealed that Rome's political system could no longer manage social crisis without violence. They showed that tribunes could become revolutionary figures. They showed that the Senate could answer reform with force. They showed that the language of liberty and tyranny could be used by every side, and they opened a century in which Roman politics would become increasingly unforgiving. The Forum, once the place of public speech and civic ritual, now carried another memory. Blood on stone, citizens against citizens. The Republic still stood, its temples still rose, its magistrates still wore the toga, its armies still conquered. But the old trust had been wounded, and wounded trust is one of the hardest things for a republic to heal. After the Gracchi, Rome's problems did not sleep, they moved beneath the surface. The poor still needed land. The allies still wanted rights. The armies still needed soldiers. The nobility still competed for honor, and Rome's enemies still watched for weakness. In this world rose Gaius Marius. Marius was not from the oldest circle of Rome's aristocracy. He came from Arpinum, a town in Italy, and was considered a novus homo, a new man, the first of his family to reach the consulship. He made his name through military ability, toughness, and popular appeal. He was not polished in the old aristocratic manner, but Rome increasingly needed commanders more than polished speeches. His opportunity came in the war against Jugurtha, king of Numidia in North Africa. The Jugurthine War exposed Roman corruption and aristocratic incompetence. Jugurtha understood Roman politics well enough to bribe, delay, and manipulate. Roman anger grew as the war dragged on. Marius presented himself as a capable alternative to the failing nobility. He won the consulship in 107 BC and took command. Under him, and with the help of his quaestor Lucius Cornelius Sulla, Jugurtha was eventually captured. Marius returned with prestige, but his greater importance lay in the army. Rome had long relied on property-owning citizens for military service, but the pressures of empire and land loss made recruitment harder. Marius accepted volunteers from the poorer classes, men who had little or no property. These men could serve for long periods and look to their commander for rewards, especially land after discharge. The so-called Marian reforms were not a single clean event in the way older textbooks sometimes present them. Military change was gradual, but Marius stands as a symbol of a transformation that mattered immensely. The army became more professional, more permanent, more dependent on generals. The soldier who served for years under one commander, marched with him, trusted him for plunder, pay, and land, could begin to feel that his loyalty belonged first to the man who led him, not to the distant Senate. This did not destroy the Republic immediately, but it altered the emotional structure of Roman power. Marius then faced a terrifying northern threat. The Cimbrian Teutones, migrating peoples from beyond the Roman world, had defeated Roman armies and created panic. Memories of the Gallic sack returned. Rome feared that northern peoples might again descend into Italy. Marius was elected consul repeatedly, an extraordinary breach of normal practice justified by danger. He reorganized, trained, and led Roman forces. In 102 BC, he defeated the Teutones at Aquae Sextiae. In 101 BC, he and his colleague Catulus defeated the Cimbri at Vercellae. Rome was saved. Marius became a hero. But repeated consulships showed that emergency could bend tradition. Military success could overpower constitutional caution, and popularity with soldiers and people could make one man larger than normal politics. Marius's later career was darker. He became entangled in political violence, rivalry with Sulla, and civil conflict. The hero who saved Rome from northern invasion would also become part of Rome's internal unraveling. This is one of the sad patterns of the late Republic. Men who served Rome also damaged it. Men who defended the state also taught others how to overpower it. Marius did not set out simply to destroy the Republic. Sulla did not either. Pompey did not. Caesar did not, at least not in the simple way his enemies claimed. But each man, through ambition, crisis, and opportunity, made the old order weaker. The Republic was becoming a stage too small for the men it produced. Lucius Cornelius Sulla was aristocratic, intelligent, ruthless, and deeply shaped by rivalry. He had served under Marius in the Jugurthine War, and the capture of Jugurtha created tension between them. Marius received much public credit, but Sulla had played a key role. The rivalry grew slowly, then violently, as Rome's politics became more extreme. The immediate crisis came from the east. Mithridates III's the Pontus, one of Rome's most formidable enemies, challenged Roman power in Asia Minor. He presented himself as a liberator from Roman exploitation, and in 88 BC, many Romans and Italians in Asia were massacred in an event remembered with horror by Roman sources. A great command against Mithridates was needed. Sulla, as consul, received it. But Marius and his allies maneuvered politically to transfer the command to Marius. For Sulla, this was unacceptable. Then came the unthinkable. Sulla marched his army on Rome, a Roman army, against the Roman city. For centuries, the boundary between military command and civic space had mattered deeply. Armies were not supposed to settle political disputes inside Rome. Sulla shattered that restraint. Imagine the fear in the city. Not foreign invaders, not Gauls, not Hannibal. Roman soldiers entering under the command of a Roman magistrate to impose a political decision by force. Sulla took control, declared enemies, and then left to fight Mithridates. While he campaigned in the east, Rome again fell into violence. Marius returned, and in his final period, proscriptions and killings stained the city. Marius died in 86 BC, but the conflict continued. Sulla eventually returned from the east with victorious troops and fought a civil war in Italy. In 82 BC, he captured Rome and became dictator. But this dictatorship was unlike the old emergency office. Sulla's power was not brief, it was constitutional surgery performed with a sword. He issued proscriptions, lists of people declared enemies of the state. They could be killed, their property confiscated, their families ruined. Personal revenge, political cleansing, and financial opportunity blended together. Heads were displayed, wealth changed hands, fear entered noble houses. Sulla then attempted to restore senatorial authority. He increased the Senate's size, restricted the tribunes, reorganized courts, and tried to limit the paths by which popular politicians could challenge aristocratic control. In his mind, perhaps, he was restoring the republic, but his methods taught the opposite lesson. He showed that violence could remake the constitution. He showed that an army could decide politics. He showed that proscriptions could enrich supporters and eliminate enemies. He showed that terror could wear the language of legality. Then, astonishingly, Sulla resigned and retired. The republic resumed its offices. Elections continued. The Senate met. Magistrates governed. But everyone remembered. The path had been opened. A later general with loyal soldiers could do what Sulla had done, and perhaps go further. Sulla thought he had restored the old order. In truth, he had revealed that the old order could be conquered. Not all threats to Rome came from rival kings, ambitious senators, or foreign armies. Some came from within the system Rome had built. Slavery was everywhere in the Roman world. Enslaved people worked in households, fields, mines, workshops, ships, schools, and estates. Many had been captured in Rome's wars, others were born into slavery. Some lived in urban households and might gain trust or eventual freedom. Others endured brutal labor in chains, especially on rural estates or in mines. The great slave uprisings of the 2nd and 1st centuries BC revealed the violence beneath Roman wealth. The most famous was the revolt of Spartacus. Spartacus was a Thracian, trained as a gladiator at Capua. In 73 BC, he and a group of gladiators escaped, armed themselves, and fled to Mount Vesuvius. What began as a breakout became a massive rebellion as enslaved people, rural laborers, and desperate followers joined them. Spartacus proved a capable and flexible leader. Roman forces underestimated the rebels and suffered defeats. The revolt moved through Italy, gathering momentum. For Rome, the fear was not only military, it was psychological. The enslaved, upon whom so much of elite wealth depended, had taken up arms. The social order itself seemed inverted. A gladiator, trained to die for Roman entertainment, now defeated Roman soldiers. For 2 years, the revolt strained Roman authority. Spartacus may have hoped to lead his followers out of Italy, perhaps toward freedom beyond Roman reach. But the movement was large, diverse, and difficult to control. Not all followers shared one strategy. Eventually, the Senate gave command to Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of Rome's richest men. Crassus imposed severe discipline, including decimation, an ancient punishment in which 1 in 10 soldiers of a disgraced unit could be killed by their comrades. It was a terrifying signal. Crassus would restore order through fear if necessary. He trapped Spartacus in the south, built fortifications, and pressed the rebels hard. Spartacus broke out, but was eventually defeated in 71 BC. He died in battle, though his body was never clearly identified. After the revolt, thousands of captured rebels were crucified along the Appian Way from Capua to Rome. Imagine that road, the Queen of Roads, the proud line of Roman power, now lined with crosses, a warning to every enslaved person, every traveler, every citizen, every enemy. Rome could be magnificent. Rome could be merciless. Pompey, returning from Spain, encountered and finished off remnants of the rebellion, allowing him to claim some credit. Crassus resented this, and rivalry between the two men deepened. The Spartacus revolt did not end slavery. It did not produce Roman moral reconsideration on the scale we might wish, but it exposed the terror at the heart of a slave society. A civilization that rests on unfreedom must always fear those it holds down, and in the late Republic, fear was becoming a constant companion. Fear of slaves, fear of generals, fear of mobs, fear of debt, fear of kings, fear of reform, fear of collapse. Rome was powerful, but it was not calm. Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great, rose in the age after Sulla. He was young, wealthy, ambitious, and militarily gifted. Sulla himself is said to have called him Magnus, the Great, a title echoing Alexander. Whether affectionate, political, or ironic, the name remained. Pompey's career was extraordinary because he repeatedly received commands beyond normal republican patterns. He fought in Sicily and Africa. He campaigned in Spain against Sertorius, a brilliant Roman rebel who had built resistance using local support and Roman military skill. Sertorius was difficult to defeat, and his war showed again how Roman methods could be turned against Rome by Romans themselves. Pompey returned to Italy as Spartacus's revolt was ending and gained additional prestige. Then came the pirates. Piracy in the Mediterranean had become a serious problem, disrupting trade, grain supply, and coastal security. Rome's expanding world depended on sea routes. Pirates were not merely colourful criminals, they were a strategic threat. In 67 BC, Pompey received an extraordinary command under the Lex Gabinia to clear the seas. His authority extended across the Mediterranean and coastal regions. Traditionalists feared such concentrated power, but the problem was urgent, and Pompey acted with impressive speed. He divided the sea into zones, coordinated fleets, and suppressed piracy in a campaign remembered as brilliantly efficient. The next year, he received another major command against Mithridates under the Lex Manelia. Cicero supported the law, praising Pompey's ability, prestige, and fortune. Pompey defeated Mithridates, reorganized the East, created or adjusted provinces, settled client kingdoms, and entered Jerusalem during regional conflicts in Judea. By the time he returned to Rome, Pompey had reshaped the eastern Mediterranean. He had armies loyal to him, veterans expecting land, a settlement requiring ratification, immense prestige. But the Senate, wary of his power, delayed and resisted his wishes. This was a recurring failure of late Republican politics. The aristocracy feared extraordinary men, but often pushed them into alliances with other forces by refusing reasonable compromise. Pompey wanted land for his veterans and approval for his eastern arrangements. Crassus wanted influence and financial interests protected. Caesar wanted advancement, office, and a path to greatness. Their needs converged. The result was the informal alliance of 60 BC, Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar, the first triumvirate. It was not a constitutional office, it was power behind the constitution. Three men using wealth, prestige, popularity, and political machinery to overcome resistance. In a healthier republic, such an alliance might have been unnecessary or impossible. In late Rome, it became the engine of politics. Pompey married Caesar's daughter Julia, creating a family bond between the two men. For a time, the alliance held. But alliances among ambitious men often depend on circumstances that do not last. Julia died. Crassus marched east in search of military glory equal to Pompey and Caesar, in Gaul, became greater than anyone had expected. Julius Caesar was born into a patrician family with ancient prestige, but limited recent power. His family claimed descent from Venus through Aeneas and Iolus, a mythical genealogy that later became politically useful. But noble ancestry alone did not make a man dominant in late Republican Rome. He needed money, office, allies, soldiers, and fame. Caesar possessed charm, intelligence, courage, and theatrical instinct. He understood people. He understood timing. He understood symbols. As a young man, he lived through Sulla's dictatorship and was connected by marriage to the Marian faction. Sulla ordered him to divorce his wife Cornelia, but Caesar refused and went into danger. He survived, partly through family influence and perhaps Sulla's reluctance. Later stories present Sulla as warning that in Caesar there were many Mariuses. Whether exact or invented, the line captures how later Romans saw Caesar, a man in whom old conflicts returned with greater force. Caesar served in the East, gained a reputation for courage, and famously was captured by pirates. According to the story, he joked with them, insisted they had demanded too small a ransom, and promised to crucify them after release. Once freed, he raised ships, captured the pirates, and had them executed. The tale may be polished by later memory, but it shows the Caesar people wanted to imagine, fearless, proud, humorous, and deadly serious beneath the charm. In Rome, Caesar climbed the cursus honorum, the ladder of offices. He spent lavishly. He went deeply into debt. Debt was not merely personal weakness in Roman politics. It could be investment. Games, public generosity, legal advocacy, and social display built popularity. But debt also made success urgent. A failed career could ruin a man. A successful provincial command could repay everything. Caesar aligned with popular causes and honored the memory of Marius, his aunt's husband, at a time when Sulla's old supporters still mattered. He served as quaestor, aedile, pontifex maximus, praetor, and governor in Spain. As aedile, He spent heavily on games and public works, dazzling the people. His election as Pontifex Maximus in 63 BC was especially significant. It gave him religious prestige and a residence in the Forum. He defeated older, more established candidates, partly through bold campaigning and debts. That same year, Rome faced the Catilinarian conspiracy. Lucius Sergius Catilina, or Catiline, a bankrupt aristocrat, was accused of plotting revolution. Cicero, as consul, exposed the conspiracy in famous speeches. The Senate debated what to do with captured conspirators. Caesar argued against immediate execution without trial, urging life imprisonment in Italian towns. Cato the Younger argued for execution. Cicero had them executed. The episode revealed deep tensions, debt, aristocratic desperation, emergency power, popular fear, and constitutional ambiguity. Cicero saw himself as savior of the Republic. Others later saw the executions as legally troubling. Caesar's position showed caution, calculation, or principle, perhaps all three. By the late 60s BC, Caesar was rising but not yet supreme. Pompey had military glory. Crassus had wealth. The Senate had prestige. Caesar had ambition and momentum. What he needed was a command that could transform him. Gaul would do that. Gaul was not empty wilderness. It was a vast and varied world of tribes, towns, trade networks, sanctuaries, warriors, farmers, nobles, druids, and shifting alliances. Roman writers often described Gauls through stereotypes of bravery, instability, and barbarism. But Gaul had complex societies, fortified settlements called oppida, skilled metalwork, long-distance trade, and political structures that Caesar both exploited and described for his Roman audience. When Caesar took command in Gaul in 58 BC, he gained more than a province. He gained opportunity. His assigned territories gave him legions, legal immunity while in command, and access to a frontier where conflict could be expanded. Caesar's commentaries present his campaigns as defensive necessities, responses to threats, appeals from allies, migrations, and instability. There was some truth in these situations, but Caesar also shaped events to serve ambition. The Helvetii, a people moving from their homeland, provided the first major campaign. Caesar blocked, fought, and defeated them, presenting the movement as a danger to Roman interests. Then came Ariovistus, a Germanic king who had crossed into Gaul. Caesar defeated him and cast himself as protector of Gaul against Germanic aggression. Campaign followed campaign. The Belgae, the Veneti, whose naval resistance along the Atlantic coast forced Rome into unfamiliar maritime warfare. Germanic crossings, expeditions across the Rhine, 2 invasions of Britain. More symbolic than permanent conquest at that stage, but spectacular for Roman audiences. Each year brought dispatches to Rome. Each victory brought wealth. Each hardship bound the legions closer to Caesar. War in Gaul was often brutal. Caesar could be merciful when mercy served him. He could also be ruthless. Villages burned. Hostages were taken. People were enslaved. Rebellion was punished. The conquest culminated in the Great Revolt of Vercingetorix in 52 BC. Vercingetorix, an Arvernian noble, attempted what Hannibal had once hoped to inspire in Italy, a broad coalition against Roman power. He used scorched earth tactics, forcing Caesar to operate in a hostile landscape with supply problems. The struggle was severe. At Gergovia, Caesar suffered a setback. Then Vercingetorix withdrew to Alesia. Alesia became one of the most remarkable sieges in ancient history. Caesar's army built a ring of fortifications around the hilltop stronghold to trap Vercingetorix inside. When a massive Gallic relief force arrived, Caesar built another line facing outward. The Romans were besieging and being besieged at the same time. Imagine the landscape: earthworks, ditches, towers, stakes, traps hidden in the ground, smoke rising from Roman camps, Gauls trapped inside, hungry and desperate, a relief army beyond the lines, shouting across the fields, Roman soldiers holding between 2 dangers. The final battle was desperate. Caesar moved reserves, appeared in his red cloak, and inspired his troops. The Gallic relief failed. Vercingetorix surrendered. Later, in Caesar's triumph, Vercingetorix would be displayed in Rome and then executed. Gaul was not pacified instantly, but organized resistance had been broken. Caesar emerged with immense wealth, military prestige, and legions devoted to him. Rome could not ignore him now. Nor could his enemies allow him to return simply as a private citizen. The road from Gaul led toward the Rubicon, and the Republic, already wounded by generations of conflict, stood before its final crisis. The Rubicon was not a great river. It was small, but history often turns on small places. In 49 BC, Caesar faced a choice. His command in Gaul was ending. His enemies in Rome, led by men such as Cato and supported increasingly by Pompey, wanted him to lay down his command and return as a private citizen. Once he did, he could be prosecuted, humiliated, and politically destroyed. Caesar wanted to stand for consul in absentia, or retain protection until he could enter office. Negotiations failed. Trust had collapsed. For Caesar, giving up his army meant surrendering himself to enemies. For the Senate's hardliners, allowing Caesar to keep his army meant surrendering the Republic to a warlord. Both sides claimed legality. Both sides feared tyranny. Both sides distrusted compromise. And so Caesar crossed the Rubicon with the 13th Legion. Alea eacta est, the die is cast, the phrase later attached to the moment. Whether he said those exact words or not, the meaning is clear. He had entered Italy under arms. Civil war had begun. Pompey and many senators fled Rome, choosing to regroup in the east, where Pompey had influence, resources, and prestige. Caesar moved quickly, securing Italy with remarkable speed. He did not unleash indiscriminate terror. In fact, he often emphasized clemency, pardoning enemies when it served his image and strategy. Clementia Caesaris became a political weapon. Mercy could win supporters. Mercy could shame opponents. Mercy could suggest that Caesar was not Sulla. But mercy from a conqueror is still a form of power. Caesar then moved against Pompeian forces in Spain, declaring that he went to fight an army without a leader, before fighting a leader without an army. His speed and confidence were astonishing. The decisive confrontation with Pompey came at Phasaelis in 48 BC. Pompey had a larger force and strong senatorial backing. Many expected him to win, but Caesar's veterans were experienced, disciplined, and personally loyal. In the battle, Caesar countered Pompey's cavalry advantage with a reserve line that struck at the right moment. Pompey's army collapsed. Pompey fled to Egypt. There, seeking refuge, he was murdered by order of advisors to the young king Ptolemy XIII, who hoped to please Caesar. When Caesar arrived and was presented with Pompey's severed head, later tradition says he wept or turned away in grief. Pompey had been his rival, his former son-in-law, one of Rome's greatest generals, and now he was reduced to a political gift from a foreign court. Civil war had devoured dignity. In Egypt, Caesar became entangled in the struggle between Cleopatra VII and her brother. Cleopatra, forced from power, famously found a way to reach Caesar, later imagined through the story of being smuggled in a carpet or bedding sack. The details are theatrical, but her political intelligence was real. She understood that Egypt's survival depended on Roman power. Caesar supported Cleopatra. War broke out in Alexandria. The great city, with its lighthouse, palaces, libraries, temples, and Greek-Egyptian culture, became a battlefield. Caesar won. Cleopatra became queen, ruling with formal co-rulers but effectively as Rome's allied monarch. She and Caesar had a son, Caesarion. Caesar then moved rapidly through other campaigns. In Pontus, after defeating Pharnaces, he sent the famous message, Vini, vidi, vici, I came, I saw, I conquered. In Africa and Spain, Pompeian resistance continued and was crushed. By 45 BC, Caesar stood unrivaled. The Republic had offices, but no equal power to him. He was dictator, then dictator for longer, then dictator perpetuo, dictator in perpetuity. To some, this meant salvation after chaos. To others, it meant the death of liberty. Caesar's rule was brief, but intensely active. He faced the enormous task of stabilizing a world shattered by civil war. He settled veterans. He founded colonies. He reformed the calendar, creating the Julian calendar, a more regular solar system that would shape timekeeping for centuries. He expanded the Senate, bringing in men from Italy and provinces, which made old aristocrats feel their dignity diluted. He planned public works. He addressed debt. He granted citizenship in some regions. He prepared campaigns, perhaps against Parthia, where Crassus's defeat still haunted Roman pride. Caesar was not merely a destroyer, he was a reformer. But reform under one man's domination looked like monarchy to those who feared him. He accepted honors that seemed excessive. His statue stood among kings. His image appeared on coins in his lifetime, a striking departure from Roman tradition. He wore triumphal dress in public settings. A golden chair, special priesthoods, and unprecedented privileges surrounded him. At the festival of the Lupercalia, Mark Antony publicly offered him a diadem, a symbol associated with kingship. Caesar refused it, but the moment was dangerous. Was it a test? A staged gesture? A sincere offer? Romans watching may not have known. The old hatred of kings stirred again. A group of senators formed a conspiracy. They included men Caesar had pardoned. They included Brutus, whose name carried the memory of the founder who had expelled the kings. They included Cassius, sharp and resentful. Some acted from principle, some from jealousy, some from fear. Most likely, motives were mixed. On March 15, 44 BC, the Ides of March, Caesar entered a meeting of the Senate held in the theatre of Pompey. That setting itself feels almost too symbolic. Caesar was murdered beneath the shadow of Pompey's name. The conspirators gathered around him as if presenting petitions. Then the daggers came. Caesar was stabbed many times. Ancient accounts differ on his final words, and the famous "et tu, Brute" belongs more to later literary tradition than secure history, but the emotional power of the scene remains. The man who had defeated the Republic's armies died at the hands of its senators. The conspirators called themselves liberators. They expected, perhaps, that Rome would rejoice. But Rome did not simply return to the old republic. The people were uncertain. The army mattered. Caesar's veterans mattered. His name mattered. His will mattered. Mark Antony, in the funeral, turned public feeling against the assassins. Caesar's body was displayed. His wounds were shown or described. His generosity to the people was read. Emotion surged. The assassins left Rome. They had killed Caesar, but they had not built a government. This is one of history's hardest lessons. Removing a ruler is not the same as restoring a system. The Republic was not waiting intact beneath Caesar's body. It had been broken by generations of mistrust, violence, inequality, personal armies, and imperial scale. The murder ended Caesar's life. It did not revive the Republic. Instead, it summoned the final civil wars. Caesar's heir was not Mark Antony. It was Gaius Octavius, Caesar's great-nephew, adopted in Caesar's will. He was young, only 18, and many underestimated him. That was a mistake. Octavian, later Augustus, possessed a cold patience unlike Caesar's glittering boldness. He was not the greatest battlefield commander of his age. He was not physically imposing. He was not a romantic figure in the way later stories made Caesar or Antony romantic, but he understood power. He understood names. He understood legality. He understood propaganda. He understood when to wait and when to strike. At first he maneuvered between Antony, the Senate, Cicero, and Caesar's veterans. Cicero hoped to use the young man against Antony, calling him a useful boy. But Octavian was nobody's tool for long. In 43 BC, Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus formed the second triumvirate. Unlike the first triumvirate, this was legally established and openly dictatorial. The three men claimed power to restore the state. They began with proscriptions, lists of enemies, confiscations, deaths. Cicero, who had attacked Antony in his Philippic speeches, was killed. His head and hands were displayed in the Forum. The voice of the Republic, the great orator who had defended constitutional ideals, was silenced by the politics of revenge. The triumvirs then turned against Caesar's assassins. At Philippi in 42 BC, Brutus and Cassius were defeated. Both died by suicide. The liberators' cause ended on a battlefield far from Rome. The Roman world was divided. Antony took the east. Octavian took the west. Lepidus gradually became irrelevant and was pushed aside. Antony in the east entered into alliance and relationship with Cleopatra VII of Egypt. Cleopatra was not merely a seductress, as hostile Roman propaganda later suggested. She was a monarch defending her dynasty and kingdom in a world dominated by Rome. She spoke multiple languages, controlled immense wealth, and ruled one of the Mediterranean's most important states. Antony needed Eastern resources. Cleopatra needed Roman partnership. Together, they formed a political union that alarmed Octavian. Octavian carefully shaped the story. He did not present the final conflict simply as civil war against Antony, a Roman rival. He presented it as a war against Cleopatra, a foreign queen who had corrupted a Roman man and threatened Rome with Eastern luxury and monarchy. It was propaganda, but powerful propaganda. The donations of Alexandria, in which Antony recognized territories for Cleopatra's children, including Ciarian, seemed to confirm fears that Antony was building an Eastern dynastic order. Octavian obtained and publicized Antony's will, or claimed to, suggesting Antony wished to be buried in Alexandria and favored Cleopatra's children. Whether handled fairly or not, the political effect was devastating. In 31 BC, the forces of Octavian and Antony met near Actium, off the western coast of Greece. Agrippa, Octavian's brilliant admiral, played a crucial role. Antony and Cleopatra's fleet was defeated or broke through only in part, and the war's momentum turned decisively. In 30 BC, Octavian entered Egypt. Antony died by suicide. Cleopatra also died by suicide, refusing, perhaps, to be displayed in a Roman triumph. Caesar and Cleopatra's son, was killed. 2 Caesars were one too many. Egypt became a Roman province, but not an ordinary one. It was too wealthy, too strategic, too connected to grain supply and royal prestige. It became effectively the emperor's personal domain, governed by an equestrian prefect rather than a senatorial governor. Octavian stood alone. The civil wars were over. The republic was exhausted. The people wanted peace. The aristocracy wanted survival. The soldiers wanted rewards. The provinces wanted order. Octavian would give them all something close enough, but he would not give back the old republic. He would give Rome a monarchy disguised as memory. He would become Augustus, and the empire would begin to breathe in a new rhythm. And now, as this long Roman night begins to soften around us, we can let the noise of history grow quiet. The speeches in the forum fade, the bronze voices of senators fall silent. The sandals of soldiers no longer strike the stones of the Appian Way. The crowds of the Circus Maximus become a distant murmur, like wind moving over an empty field. The torches outside the temples burn lower. The aqueducts still carry their silver threads of water through the darkness, but even their sound seems gentler now. Rome, which once filled the world with commands, begins to feel less like an empire and more like a dream remembered at the edge of sleep. We have travelled tonight from the quiet banks of the Tiber to the marble heart of the Mediterranean. We saw a small settlement rise among hills and marshes. We watched kings become memory, and a republic take shape through law, duty, conflict, and fear of tyranny. We followed citizens and allies across Italy, through mountain wars, Latin rivalries, Samnite resistance, Greek cities, and the long stone roads that slowly tied the peninsula together. We crossed the sea to Sicily. We heard the creak of Roman ships learning the language of waves. We felt the shadow of Carthage, and the colder shadow of Hannibal descending from the Alps with men, horses, elephants, hunger, and impossible determination. We stood, for a moment, at Cannae, where Rome almost broke, and then we watched Rome do what Rome so often did: endure, return, rebuild, continue. But victory brought its own unease. The Mediterranean opened. Gold, grain, slaves, statues, books, and ambitions flowed toward the city. The republic grew richer, wider, and less able to remain itself. The Gracchi spoke of land and justice, and their blood marked the stones of Roman politics. Marius changed the army. Sulla marched on Rome. Spartacus rose from the world Rome had enslaved. Pompey gathered glory in the east. Caesar crossed rivers, conquered Gaul, crossed the Rubicon, and discovered that even supreme power could not protect a man from daggers carried in the name of liberty. Then came Octavian, patient and cold beneath the name of Caesar. The last civil wars faded into the age of Augustus. The Republic did not vanish in one thunderclap. It became ceremony. It became memory. It became marble wrapped around monarchy. And Rome, exhausted by generations of conflict, accepted peace. For a while, the empire seemed almost eternal. Roads stretched through forests, deserts, mountains, and plains. Merchants carried oil, wine, glass, spices, papyrus, cloth, and stories from port to port. Legions guarded rivers beneath cold northern skies. Governors read petitions in distant provinces. Children learned letters on wax tablets. Bakers rose before dawn. Bathhouses filled with steam and conversation. Ships entered harbours under the gaze of lighthouses and gods. In Africa, fields of grain moved in the wind. In Egypt, the Nile rose and fell as it had for ages before Rome. In Gaul and Spain, Local families carved Latin inscriptions into stone. In Britain, soldiers looked north from walls and forts at landscapes Rome never fully possessed. In the east, Greek cities continued to speak with old voices beneath Roman rule. And in Rome itself, the Colosseum rose, magnificent and terrible, a monument to engineering, spectacle, power, and pain. The empire was never only glory. It was also taxation, conquest, slavery, hunger, fear, and the heavy machinery of rule. It created order, and it demanded obedience. It built cities, and it destroyed cities. It gave citizenship, and it took freedom. It preserved law, and it practiced violence. To remember Rome honestly is to hold both truths together, the marble and the chain, the aqueduct and the battlefield, the poem and the prison, the road and the crucifix beside it. Yet still, through all its contradictions, Rome became one of history's deepest echoes. Its language changed into other languages. Its laws entered the foundations of later worlds. Its architecture taught stone how to speak in arches, domes, vaults, and columns. Its political words still move through our own age. Republic, Senate, citizen, dictator, empire, province, forum. Its warnings remain as clear as its achievements. A republic can be weakened from within long before it is defeated from without. Inequality can become political fire. Armies can become loyal to men rather than institutions. Ambition can dress itself as necessity. Violence, once welcomed as a solution, rarely returns quietly to its cage. And power, even when it claims to restore the past, may be building something entirely new. But now, we do not need to carry all those lessons at once. Not tonight. Tonight, we can simply let Rome recede. Imagine the city after midnight. The Forum lies under pale moonlight. The temples are dark. The Senate House is empty. No crowd gathers before the rostra. No consul calls for silence. No general waits for a triumph. A stray dog moves through a narrow street. A lamp flickers in an upper window. Somewhere, water runs softly through a channel built by hands long gone. Beyond the walls, the roads stretch outward into darkness. One road toward Capua. One toward the Adriatic. One toward the Alps. One toward ports where ships once sailed for Africa, Greece, Egypt, Syria, and Spain. The roads are empty now. No legion marches, no courier rides, no senator's carriage rattles over the stones. Only the night remains, and the stars. The same stars above Romulus's hilltop village, the same stars above Hannibal's campfires, the same stars above Caesar's tents in Gaul, the same stars above Augustus's marble city, the same stars above tired soldiers on the Rhine, mothers in crowded apartments, enslaved workers in silent courtyards, merchants asleep beside their cargo, and children dreaming in languages the empire gathered into itself. History, at this distance, becomes very quiet. The victories no longer shout. The defeats no longer bleed. The names become softer. Romulus, Lucretia, Hannibal, Scipio, Tiberius Gracchus, Gaius Gracchus, Marius, Sulla, Spartacus, Pompey, Caesar, Cleopatra, Antony, Augustus. They pass like figures in a long procession of candlelight, each one bright for a moment, then slowly fading into the dark. And behind them remains the city. Not only the city of stone, but the city of memory. The Rome people feared. The Rome people admired. The Rome people served. The Rome people resisted. The Rome people inherited without always knowing it. So, wherever you are listening from tonight, let this ancient city become still. Let the Tiber move gently through your imagination. Let the moon rest on broken columns. Let the last torch burn low beside an empty road. Let the distant empire release its hold on the mind. And before sleep takes you fully, if you are still awake, write your city in the comments and the hour on your clock right now. Perhaps it is late where you are. Perhaps the room is quiet. Perhaps the world outside your window has already softened into darkness. And perhaps, in some small way, your own city will join this night journey. One more point of light on a map far larger than Rome ever knew. Thank you for walking these ancient roads with me. Now let the Forum fall silent. Let the eagles lower their wings. Let the marble cool beneath the moon. Let the empire become a whisper. And let yourself drift, slowly and peacefully, into sleep.